और खपे और उसके आगे और हिम्मत बढ़े कि हम और बनाएं इसको, और महिलाओं को रखे बनवाएं, ये चाहते हैं
जी। पैसे की दिक्कत सबको होती है, अगर किसी बिजनेस में पैसा ज़्यादा लगाएंगे तो प्रॉफिट ऑटोमेटिक बढ़ जाएगा।
अगर मुझे पूंजी मिल जाए जल्द से जल्द तो मैं अपनी दुकान को और जल्द से जल्द बढ़ा सकती हूँ।
जैसे आर्थिक रूप से हमारी मदद हुई तो आर्थिक रूप से सामान बढ़ाया तो ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा बुकिंग ली, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा जब बुकिंग लेंगी तो ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लोगों को रोजगार भी मिलेगा
और हमारा भी नाम रोशन होगा और ये अच्छा लगेगा यहाँ पे, और समस्याएं सारी दूर हो जाएंगी।
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम माधुरी राजेश रामुशी है। मैं यूनिट नंबर 22 आर्यो कॉलोनी यहाँ की रहने वाली हूँ। घर पे मेरी सास है, हस्बैंड है, 2 बच्चे लोग और मैं। सास को पैरालिसिस हुआ तो उसको चलने को नहीं आता है, वो घर पे बैठी रहती है। हस्बैंड है पुलिस में। हम लोग को बताया ऐसा ऐसा काम है, पहले इतना ध्यान नहीं दिया, फिर बाद में हम लोग को थोड़ा थोड़ा काम आने लगा, फिर आदत सी लग गई वो काम की, अच्छा लगा। पैसा मिलता है, उससे हम लोग बचत भी करते हैं। 2-3 महीने का आता होगा, 8-9 हज़ार आता है। मतलब कभी पेंटिंग का मैंने किया नहीं, अभी मेरा पेंटिंग का अमेरिका बाहर गाँव भी गया, वो थैली के ऊपर बनाया था मैंने, वो अमेरिका में बाहर गया, 500 का मैंने बेचा था। मतलब बहुत अच्छा लगा मुझे, अरे वाह हम लोग पेंटिंग सीखे, मतलब थैली के ऊपर भी बना सकते, बाहर अपन बिजनेस कर सकते, उसका पैसा मिलता है तो बहुत अच्छा लगा। ये पेंटिंग की वजह से हम लोग कभी घर से पाँव नहीं निकाला बाहर, पेंटिंग की वजह से हम लोग को बहुत जगह घूमने को मौका मिला। सब बाहर कैसे रहते कैसे जाते सब लोग हम लोग ने देखा। हम औरतों लोग का, सब लेडीज़ लोग का इच्छा है कि अपन खुद के पैरों के ऊपर खड़ा रह के अपना खुद का दुकान खोलेंगे करके, फिर अपन भी एग्जीबिशन के लिए जा सकते हैं, अपना खुद का रहेगा तो अपना भी नाम आगे होएगा करके। वारली पेंटिंग का जैसे हम लोग ने सीखा है वैसे दूसरे लेडीज़ लोग ने भी सीखना चाहिए, उनका भी फ़ायदा होएगा, बाहर जाने को मौका मिलेगा। ये वारली की वजह से उनको भी सेल मिलेगा, प्लस बाहर कैसे लोग रहते कैसे बोलते सब पता चलेगा उनको। LTI और UNDP की तरफ से हम लोग को काम मिल रहा है, बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है। उनको काम के बहुत ऑर्डर मिलना चाहिए और हम लोग को बहुत काम ला के देना चाहिए। लॉकडाउन के वजह
So, hello and welcome back, everyone. Now, before we move further to the track session of the summit, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. So, today's sessions are being recorded and you will be able to view them on our YouTube channel. You can find us under the name of Access Development Services. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it further. Secondly, we invite your comments and questions. Please take a look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, you can type it in there and we will hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the session. I welcome you to our first track, curated by Development Alternatives on Pathways to Inclusive Entrepreneurship 2030. I would like to welcome Ms. Kanika Verma, AVP and Lead Green and Inclusive Entrepreneurship Development Alternatives Group. Very brief introduction, Ms. Verma leads the Sustainable Enterprise domain of the DA Group. A major segment of her work is on enhancing livelihood security for women in underserved areas of India. She is currently a part of the leadership team incubating Indian Micro Enterprise Development Foundation, which focuses on delivering enterprise support services at scale. She is the co-founder of Systems Play, a platform for fostering collaborations, experimentation, and learning with system innovators. Kanika is passionate about social innovation and system change, and philosophically and practically sees herself building bridges that connect the unique aspirations of potential entrepreneurs to an ecosystem of enabling services. Very warm welcome, Kanika. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kanika. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Parul and the Access team for letting us be part of the Access Livelihood family for the last couple of years, and this year specifically because we've going to be talking about an extremely important and urgent topic that has been part of many conversations, but needs more dialogue, more focus. I think we've been hearing since morning that the significant challenge to job creation and livelihoods has a very important element of inclusivity and equity. And in that spirit, we have organized this particular track where we're trying to get in the two sessions that we've organized to sort of have a discourse on what could be the pathway for inclusive entrepreneurship that actually can lead the way for job creation and dignified livelihoods. And sort of to reiterate or to sort of elaborate further, I will just share a very brief presentation to talk a little bit more about this. So I hope everyone can see my screen. I think since morning, again, we've been talking about that though, we've been sort of growing, the economies able to sort of bounce back a little bit of the pandemic, the gap that exists between what we call India and Bharat has been increasing. And I'll share a few data points that might sort of help us understand this a little bit further. While the Indian economy was able to, the GDP was able to come back to 8.4%, the amount of poor has been rapidly increasing. The Indian billionaires were growing richer by 35%, but about 12.2 crore people lost jobs during the COVID lockdown. Further data numbers that reiterate this idea of an exclusive India and an excluded Bharat is reiterated by the fact that we're now the third largest startup ecosystem in the world with 34 unicorn startups, but nearly 35% of MSMEs are considering shutting down their operations in 2021. And while we aim to become a 5 trillion economy by 24-25, the unemployment rates in 2021 remain in double digits for 11 Indian states. And while the 1% of India's population earns 22% of the total national income, the bottom 50% actually just makes 13%. So not only do we have to address this challenge of equitable growth, but we also have to address how at the local level, the economic, the economy starts sort of starts building up. And in that light, can we move towards a scenario of where instead of being just job seekers, people actually become job creators? In the Indian employment is complex. It has a big spectrum of being completely unemployed to sporadic unemployment to even disguised unemployment to then sort of start going towards sporadic self-employment. And then there is this whole aspect of entrepreneurship where there is an aspiration to sort of achieve novel ideas and challenging the existing systems of production that we believe could be a pathway towards the movement in the employment. If there are about 40, let's sort of break down the numbers a little bit more. If there are about 40 million unemployed in India and 400 of them are being employed in the informal sector, and in the previous session, I think by Vijay Mahajanji's calculations, he had assumed that 120 million jobs have to be created. Our calculations are coming up to be about 90 million. But these are numbers. I think we're very close and we can keep debating over them. But I think the magnitude of the challenge is somewhere around that. If we were to look at even one micro enterprise or one local business creating 3 jobs and break that number down further, we only need to create about 450 enterprises per block, coming down to only 5 new enterprises per village, which seems like a very doable challenge and can actually sort of help us move people towards the spectrum that they're currently sort of stuck on the left side. So, data at the end of the day is sort of data is data. But what about what are we seeing on ground? What are the stories sort of out there? And I've had the opportunity to sort of talk to a lot of entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs, the ones who sort of trying to make their ends meet on ground after the pandemic. And the stories are absolutely inspiring. One such lady, of course, is Roshni Begum, who not only in this day and age where we keep talking about market challenges and mobility challenges to women, not only was she able to look particularly at the market side of the business that she ran, but also now aggregates products from 42 women entrepreneurs, and of course also employs 4 women as well. She's literally created this tribe of entrepreneurs beyond religion, beyond caste, beyond any social groups that anyone belong to. And that's the phenomena of inclusive entrepreneurship that perhaps is the answer to a lot of the challenges that we're talking about, where underrepresented groups, social groups such as youth, women, marginalized, are able to get equitable access to entrepreneurship opportunities so that they can literally become the owners of their lives. And in a way, we are able to transform the way small businesses create jobs and local growth in their economy. Just a brief framework, and I think we're all looking forward to hearing from the panelists today in both the sessions, but a brief framework, and that might sort of help us look at what are the systemic changes that are required to reach the numbers that we're sort of talking about it and have many more Roshni Begum emerge as leaders. And the first itself, I think, would be the behavior of the system that we're all part of. I think there's a lot of reflection that we have to do as actors in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, where the entrepreneurship ecosystem in general is very emergent. It's very organic, and the entrepreneurs are very strong actors in that ecosystem who sort of engage a lot with the stakeholders in the ecosystem. But the moment we sort of bring down top-down schemes into that ecosystem, we're not only maybe perhaps suppressing entrepreneurship in people, but also doing it more from a subsistence point of view, but not from an opportunity-driven point of view where entrepreneurs are looking for opportunities themselves. So collective transformation for each one of us to work together as actors in this ecosystem, but also giving more space for entrepreneurs to co-create the solutions. I think the second is that perhaps there's a need to move away from enterprise development towards building this entrepreneurial ecosystem, where we're looking at, looking more at innovation, fostering innovation in the ecosystem, looking at prototypes in the finance, in the market space that actually creates shifts in the system. And we're able to reach out to entrepreneurs who generally do not have a pathway towards entrepreneurship, and also enhance access to basic information when someone wants to set up a business. And the third, of course, is the policy architecture, where I think, again, we've talked at length today since morning about the informality and the complexity around, many of these such entrepreneurs being part of that subsystem. So can we move towards a hybrid transition, which enables entrepreneurs to maybe slowly look at a hybrid system of informal, formal? We respond to the dynamic changes that have happened after the post-pandemic, where digitization seems to be a major aspect of running a business, or even at the meso level of policy, how actors can sort of come together, and there's much more empowerment at that particular level. So with that, I'd actually like to leave it to the panelists to sort of talk a little bit more about the subject itself. But just in the spirit of someone like Roshni Begum, who literally says that since she was a little girl, it took her time because her family was not okay with the idea of her becoming an entrepreneur. But since she was a little girl, she really wanted to be what she calls being the malik of her enterprise, her life, and not working for someone. So what kind of a pathway are we creating for many such women and youth? So thank you so much. I'll just quickly introduce two sessions that are part of the track today. The first one is on micro-entrepreneurship, a post-pandemic outlook. And the second one is on cluster development and sort of building an ecosystem that enables us to build these resilient local economies. We'll kick off with the first panel discussion, which is on future of micro-entrepreneurship. And I'd like to introduce the moderator, Shrashtant Patara, who is the CEO of Development Alternatives. An architect by training, Shrashtant has been responsible for the last 3 decades in being dogged about letting entrepreneurship emerge as a solution for job creation and livelihoods. He has used many mechanisms, including technology, finance, social innovation mechanisms to enable entrepreneurship at scale. And of course, it's been my privilege to work with him as a mentor and guide for the last 11 years. So, Shrashtant, over to you.
Thank you, Kanika. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I hope I'm audible and I'm not picking up an echo from other places in the office right now. A warm welcome to everyone in the audience. Unfortunately, we're still bound by the virtual medium and we cannot engage face to face. It would have been wonderful to do so, but I guess that's something we'll have to work towards in the coming years. I'm also very happy to share with everyone that we have illustrious panel with us. Anish Kumar from Transforming Rural India Foundation, Bhairavi Jani, who is in every sense of the word an entrepreneur, and Dr. Chintan Vaishnav, who's dropped off. He's back. Chintan is back, who's currently the mission director of the Atal Innovation Mission. I'll say a few more words about our panel in a little while, but just to set the ball rolling in terms of what we're going to cover in the next hour and 10 or hour and 15 minutes or so, I would like to draw everyone's attention once again to few of the points that Kanika had made. One, while we might be talking about something which is complex and probably is at an unfathomable scale, when we talk about hundreds or a few, 100 million livelihoods or so, these are scales that have never been dealt with. And yet, with all the complexity and the magnitude at which we see the challenges, if you break it down, you can see that just 3 or 4 or 5 new businesses in rural areas, small towns, could create every year in every village, could create the kind of decent, meaningful work that millions of people need in this country. And the other is, of course, something that we'll dwell upon today, which is what kind of systemic shifts do you need in order to make this change happen? How do you make sure that you're not just addressing the problems that we see at the surface, but are actually going down into the underlying causes and, in a sense, creating systemic change or change that is systemic in nature when we talk about entrepreneurship or job creation. To start with a quick reminder, I hope the technology can help us pull it off. We'll just go to Bundelkhand for a minute and a half or so and listen to what entrepreneur Mr. Mangal Singh has to say about his business and his vision for economic empowerment in the area. Let's hope this works. Could someone switch the video on?
मेरा नाम मंगल सिंह दोहरे है। मेरा पता ग्राम बहटा, पोस्ट टीसागढ़, डिस्ट्रिक्ट झांसी, इन उत्तर प्रदेश। मैं अपने गांव में ही पहले एक छोटा सा कंप्यूटर रखकर काम करता था, जिसमें मतलब फोटो कॉपी वगैरह है, ये गांव में अवेलेबल सुविधाएं कराता था। लेकिन कुछ समय बाद जब गांव में प्रॉपर फॉर प्रोग्रेस के माध्यम से प्रचार हो रहा था, तो प्रोग्राम कर रहे थे जिसमें मैंने भी भाग ले लिया। उसमें भाग ले लिया तो कौन बनेगा बिजनेस लीडर में मैं मतलब मुझे उसमें चुना गया और उसके माध्यम से मुझे बिजनेस के बारे में, उद्यम बढ़ाने के बारे में समझाया गया, मीटिंग ली गई और मतलब जो जो मुझे डाउट थे मतलब तो उनने वो क्लियर किए। तो उनने ही बताया कि आप मतलब अपना बिजनेस को आगे कैसे बढ़ाएंगे, क्या करेंगे, बढ़ाइए आप, उसमें जो हमारा सहयोग रहेगा सहयोग दिया जाएगा। तो उसके माध्यम से फिर मैंने मतलब अपना कियोस्क सेंटर मंडी पर खोला। ग्राहकों को और यहाँ के जो लोग हैं उनको असुविधाएं नहीं होती हैं, क्योंकि वही व्यक्ति जो झांसी जाते थे तो उनका 100 से 200 रुपये किराया लग जाता था, पूरा दिन बर्बाद होता था और उसी किराए में उनका काम यहीं पर हो जाता है। जब मुझे मतलब 50 रुपये कमाना मुश्किल होता था 2-3 साल पहले, लेकिन आज इतना है कि 2 से 3 हज़ार रुपये पर डे मैं वहाँ पे कमाता हूँ। तो काफ़ी सुविधाएं हैं और मेरा मतलब बिजनेस आगे बढ़ता ही जा रहा है और जिसमें मैंने 2 लोगों को और भी रोजगार दिया था जो मेरी अभी दुकान पर काम कर रहे हैं। इतना ही विचार है और भी मतलब जितनी हो उतनी आगे अपन सोच मतलब पॉजिटिव ही रखेंगे।
Wonderful. Just a snippet of what an entrepreneur aspires to do, what an entrepreneur can do, not just for himself or herself, but for people they see not just as customers, but people they see as an integral part of the society around them and their relationship, which is something that we would like to touch upon today. Mangal Singh made a small mention there of something called Kaun Banega Business Leader. And I would, by way of example, like to draw everyone's attention to that. Kaun Banega Business Leader is a reality show of sorts that is, held in parts of Bundelkhand and Eastern UP where some of my colleagues have been active. It's not part of any scheme, it's not part of any program. In fact, it's something that's emerged out of social innovation processes, dialogue, deep listening that took place within the community, the co-creation of something exciting that could actually motivate people to think about setting up new businesses. And then, of course, the model was prototyped, rolled out once, twice, and then keeps happening. To give you a small idea of the kind of potential, in the first time that it was rolled out, Kaun Banega Business Leader, we thought that we'd get something of the order of 70 or 80, maybe 100 applications. In 10 days, in just 20 villages, there were 815 applications from people who wanted to become business leaders. That's the kind of aspiration that that probably lies beneath the surface that we need to tap into when we're talking about changing the face of the Indian economy, certainly making it more inclusive. Let's move on now, go straight into the discussion. I'd like to take a minute or two to introduce our panel. We have Anish with us, who's first of all a good friend, but also the co-lead of Transforming Rural India Foundation. Transforming Rural India Foundation seeds solutions. It galvanizes collaborative endeavors such as Bazaar, Samaj and Sarkar to rapidly transform opportunities of empowerment in villages, bringing best practices, solutions, etc. to the fore in all the geographies that they work with. Very closely also with the Government of India in the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, Mission Antyodaya, transforming of aspirational districts program, and so on and so forth. Thank you, Anish, for being with us today. We also have Bhairavi Jani, who, as I mentioned earlier, is an entrepreneur in every sense of the word. Fourth generation leader of her family's businesses. She's also the chairperson and founder of the India Entrepreneurship Foundation, and has taken active interest in various fora in promoting the idea of not just entrepreneurship in itself, but how businesses connect with society. She's a KBF Fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, responsible leader of the BMW World Responsible Leaders Forum, member of the Trilateral Commission, a past national chairman of CII's Young Indians, and has had many awards and recognitions through her illustrious career. Dr. Chintan Vaishnav is someone that we've looked up to over the last decade now. Both in his previous avatar as the academic director of the Tata Center for Design and Technology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Sloan School of Management, and also now as the mission director for the Atal Innovation Mission. Chintan is a systems person. He thinks systems, he tries to build innovative systems. And as a teacher, innovator, and entrepreneur, he has split his time between teaching and research at MIT, and religiously, if I could say so, living and working with rural communities in India to build solutions that overcome the constraints fundamental to improving human conditions. Thank you, Chintan, and thank you, Bhairavi, for being with us here today. We will, in this discussion, look at what's happening post-pandemic, both in terms of the challenges. There are an estimated 20 to 30 million people who have, on account of COVID, been displaced. The most visible form of which has been people moving back from cities into villages. And yet, these kind of challenges also present opportunities. In our work, and I'm sure all of your work, you would have seen how many of these people, having picked up skills, having picked up insights, having made connections with their own resources and ingenuity, have actually built new businesses in the areas that they now are living in. And that's just one facet of what we need to deal with and build for the future going forward in terms of entrepreneurship-led job creation. So we look at those opportunities. We'll also look at how or where innovation is happening and how these pockets of innovation could be taken forward, and also look at what kind of instruments we might be able to unlock. What are the keys that we can turn to accelerate the growth of entrepreneurship, particularly in parts of the economy where it's needed most. I've probably spoken far too much already, and we need to get to our panel now. My apologies for doing that. We just wanted to lay the ground for the discussion that will take place. Anish, could I go to you first? What we'll do is have a quick round of opening remarks from all three panelists of about 5 minutes each. Just your thoughts on, what's vital to this conversation, what's most critical, and what we need to pay attention to. Anish.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Access and DA, for putting this together. This is, by all means, the most important agenda for India 2021 and going forward 2030. I was reflecting on micro enterprises, and I was also reflecting on, how has our policies over the years looked at micro enterprises. So I spent some time looking at the industrial policy of 1948 and later the Kave Committee's report. And both of them talked about protection and production for local consumption. And we know where we landed with that policy intent of protection and production. And in some ways, 80s marked this departure, and we did move to the whole regime of, the IRDP in some ways opened up that space, and which was also guided by Operation Flood. And if you were to look at, I don't know how many lessons we have drawn from IRDP experience, because it was one large program on, micro, and we have definitional issues there. But if we were to look at more smaller enterprises with rural artisans and marginal farmers, so it was one effort at building small business ideas, and it didn't do as well as the policy framers had expected. And later on, with the experience of SIDBI NABARD, again, I don't know how much we have looked at this. So the basic question that comes to my mind is, where are these micro enterprises come from? Some of it, Pat and Kanika, both of you alluded, and actually, the wonderful bite from Bundelkhand showed where these new enterprises will come from. But I see that there is a case for looking at micro in the micro sense of the word. Maybe these days, because we have now a nano, we can start looking at nano. When we have started any analysis, I see, it keeps looking at farm size as a big indicator for productivity growths. And we know the most of our MSME segment, whatever employment numbers that Kanika shared, it suffers from the same challenge of output, elasticity, low output and elasticity of employment. And if you start looking at, most of them are single worker farms or up to 3 workers, but so our prescriptions are around how do you increase. So, and in many forums, I see that, and that you keep talking about how do you increase the number of workers there. I don't know whether that is the right way to look at it, given the extent of challenge we have. So that is my first, observation, that maybe we need to change the vocabulary and talk more of the erstwhile, cottage. And there is a program, and Pat, you are very closely involved with that. So we start talking of these nano and more, smaller village-based enterprises. Maybe there would be a different way to look at them and look at them in terms of these performance metrics of farm size, productivity, wage, output, employment. So that's my first observation. The second and a thought that comes to my mind is it's not just a change in vocabulary, and you did say there is a missing ecosystem there, but it's also about change in culture. You go to all the villages that we go to, any educated kid is interested in government job. They're not even interested in private sector jobs. And they keep applying after applying to these jobs. So how do we create kind of a mindset which opens them to new opportunities? And willy-nilly, whatever manner you look at it, necessity enterprises, growth enterprises, we will not be able to solve unless we create a more culture which is conducive to accepting this as a rightful pursuit. The enterprise pathways for your own livelihoods. The third, is a very related point. In some ways, when you figured out division of labor as the big creator of wealth of nations, and long back, this is now 1776. So we look at, so inevitably it will lead to increase in whether it is, you call it K-shaped or whatever manner, it is inevitable capital intensity and technology intensity has to happen, and inevitably there will be what you are looking at, Pat, we are looking at will be marginalized there. So what is the way out? The way out to my mind is to change the framework to those global integrated supply chains we have seen post-COVID. Very interesting, low demand, increased prices because supply chains are it has based economic opportunity. What you have to the green, the local, the carbon miles, and maybe those would drive towards a framework of a more rural kind of a enterprise ecosystem to emerge. Today, if I want to be an entrepreneur in a village, I don't know where to go, but I know where to go and apply for a job which is non-existent, or I keep looking at those employment news columns of again non-existent jobs. So maybe we have to create, when you talk of the innovation ecosystem or the enterprise linkage and support ecosystem, we have to centrally place ourselves, and Chintan sir is here, and in some ways the Atal Innovation Lab is looking at something like that, but maybe we need to more deeply look at it, how it can be a catalyst for local economy revival and creation of employment opportunities there, and the yardsticks around that, not the capital incremental curve we keep looking at, evaluating when we look at the micro enterprises. So I'll stop here, but those were some 3 thoughts that I thought would be productive for our conversation today. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much, Anish. It's wonderful when you can spell those kind of profound thoughts out in a 1, 2, 3 point kind of manner. Very useful for our discussion. We will look at this question. I think one underlying thought or proposition in what you said was that models are built, models are broken, or models break down. Right, and if we look at the future is certainly going to be much more networked. Whether it's local networks at the scale of a village or cluster of villages, block, etc., or you're looking at supply chains that cut across continents and affect the kind of livelihoods anyone has, and predicting what's the right thing might be difficult, but in terms of being adaptive, in terms of being able to in a very fleet-footed kind of manner put together constellations, it might be something to look at, and hopefully we can come back to that. Bhairavi, you're someone who's always maintained, being from a family that's run a business for 130 or 140 years now, managing those businesses yourselves. You've always maintained that businesses don't exist for themselves. The growth of a business is not its only purpose, and that the purpose of a business goes beyond the enterprise itself, and that there's a very strong connect between business and society, a two-way connect. But in terms of today's discussion, if we are looking at how we can rebuild, how we can reimagine, and bring much more livelihood security into the lives of 80 or 90 million people through entrepreneurship, what do you think would be, again, the major concerns? What should we be guided by, and what should we work towards? If you could share your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And Anish, I think so many of your points, spoke to my heart. I grew up in an urban city. I live in a village now in the far off in Himalayas, and so I can see where the gaps are. But let me sort of take a few steps back and talk about the fact that, what we understand to be the system is completely shifting. And therefore, I think to go and apply tried and tested methods may not bode us well. More importantly, we don't have much time, because in about 8 years, we're going to have 1 billion people, a working age group. And so, we're looking at a very short amount of time, which means speed is of essence. And we're also looking at a large, complex, problem statement, if you will. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about, first of all, a couple of things which kind of are driving the systemic shift. One is, of course, the nature of job itself. Technology, networks, digitization, a lot of these aspects, including fourth industrial revolution technologies, are changing the nature of job. First, maybe for urban population, but also eventually for rural population, because rural population tends to migrate also a lot. We've seen some of that reverse because of the pandemic, but if you go and talk to younger people in a village like where I live, the first option is always to just get out of here. And I think first and foremost, we have to understand, why does that get out of here happens? In 2014, I went with a friend who was an Indologist and a rally driver friend, and drove about 18,000 kilometers across the country with this precise question, asking people that, how do you make your livelihood choices? Because I think they've never truly understood the thinking that goes behind in approaching a livelihood choice. I think once we understand the different parameters of that, we used to think just 5 years ago, stability, 5 years ago, the respect, the position mattered a lot to a lot of rural youth. That has gone out of the window. They don't care. They want to make sure that there is growth, and they want to make sure that there is opportunity for learning, there is flexibility. I mean, some of these preferences have shifted so quickly that you cannot even imagine. And it's not just in men, it's also in women. And I think we're missing some of these shifts when we don't ask our young people that, why do you want to do what you want to do? And there is no system at the school level, at the college level in rural India to guide them. I ran a small workshop last year in our local inter-college here. It has some 150 kids who come from nearby villages. And, they had never heard of career counseling. They didn't know what it was. You have a college in a rural area in Himalayas running a class on history and political science. Why isn't it running on agriculture management? And why is it not running on, computer science? And why are we not even giving these options to our rural young is a question I have. And I think in that we are not spending the time to understand how they have shifted. And I think that's very, very important, because they no more see themselves as beneficiary of a system. They see themselves as partners and contributors of the system. And we've got to create systems that help them do that. So when you look at, for example, entrepreneurship, it's a great way for a lot of rural young to say, okay, I count, I can make a difference. And I think that's the shift we need to see, right? The second, kind of the shift that is happening in the world is the agency of the individual has significantly increased. Today you have it gotten so particularized that one person sitting in a corner somewhere can reach a market somewhere else. And this is possible. I have rural women who ship using India Post to bigger cities, and from there it manages to go to cities in Europe. So I don't think this idea that we have, and Anish would, what you referred to, there's a supply chain shift, and that shift is not just about, the kind of things we do in my business, which is the connections and the logistics of all of it, but it is really about that the individual agency has increased, the willingness for it has increased, the capacity for it has increased. And so we have to ask, what can we do to allow the individual agency to materialize where it also benefits the community in which it is anchored? And that's what, that's where my third point comes, and you refer to it. I mean, my father would always tell me, when I would ask him that what is the purpose of business? Is it only money? And he would say, no, he would say it is the collective trusteeship of society. And as some of what we call are the traditional industrialized jobs moving to machines, and whether we like it or not, they will in the next 30 years. It is our responsibility to educate, to make aware of our people that, look, there is another opportunity that you're missing. You're missing the point that your little block in a far off state somewhere needs a garbage collection venture, right? You're missing the opportunity that there is a 2,000 student population whom you could train and scale by running a skilling venture. Or you could just run a small cafe, or you could run a small pastry. A year ago, in the middle of a pandemic, I ended up going to the market. It was about 60 shops. It's a very small little, the population of our cluster of villages is 8,000. And I met this young man who had started a cake and pastry shop. And I asked him, I said, what made you start a shop in the middle of a pandemic? And he said, I came back. I was working in Noida. I lost my job. I was working as a cleaner in an office building. So I came back. But, when I was working there, my interest was in, I used to see a lot of people like to eat these cakes and pastries and all. But, when I came back, I realized that our little town has only one person who makes it, and it wasn't really great. So he showed 5 women. 5 women or about 40 videos of how to make cake, bought himself 2 ovens from his savings, and created a cake and pastry shop. I mean, the guy even bakes now a Black Forest cake. So what I'm trying to say is that we underestimate the ability of our people to gauge opportunity. And it's only when we think that we say, "Arey, gaon mein kaun cake khata hai?" Aisa nahi hai. I think this divisions we have, us urban, them rural, this global, this local, are all out of the window now in the mind of the person. The restrictions, the physical restrictions, the systemic restrictions, the impediments may still exist, but they exist because system shapers haven't understood, and in the mind of the person, they have gone. And if we realize that gap, then the problem becomes even scarier, because then the aspirations have become so high that the system is going to have a real strenuous catch up to do with those. And that's why we need to get into actual understanding of what shifts, what enterprises people are doing, and why they want to do. And I think at the end of the day, if we can give them ideas locally about marrying purpose with profit, in my drive, and even though it was 7 years ago, I can tell you when I met people, they said, I'd rather live at home than go somewhere else, because my savings are wiped off when I live in a city. I'm away from my home. One trip back, I lose my complete savings. So I'd rather be even 1 hour away from my home is fine, but I'd rather be closer to my home. And that is what thousands of people told me through those 51 days. I drove everywhere across the world. So I think what I want to tell you is that we need to change our mindset about where this is going. Once we change that, then our ability to understand what is needed will significantly improve. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bhairavi. In work that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years, Development Alternatives itself, and then in partnership with Pradhan, with Transforming Rural India, what's been remarkable, I think, is the stunning degree of diversity in terms of kinds of businesses that people have set up. It really is a dazzling array, and 80% of those, are businesses that we wouldn't normally have thought of as being, not just possible but also viable in the rural economy. I would like to, at some point, across all panelists, come back to the point you made about agency and how we might be able to activate individual agency, because that, in a sense, is what the ecosystem needs to do. Not that people should be left to their own devices, because they will, and many of them will sort of battle through and fulfill those aspirations. But how can we make it much more easier so that people are on the threshold of crossing the entrepreneurship barrier, are able to do so. Entrepreneurship, of course, not being an end in itself, as both of you have already pointed out. It's a means to something for that person and, of course, for society. Chintan, sorry to keep you waiting. I was encouraged by the note taking, because I know that you're a person who maps systems and has an uncanny ability to make sense of systems. But if we combine that with all the work that you've done on innovation, then is there some way of making sense of the challenge that we have at hand, that existed 2 years ago and has probably become even more severe now in terms of being a challenge of livelihoods, of creating the enterprises that could help create those kind of jobs, but also in terms of our ability to recognize the opportunities, where we talked about the shifts that are taking place, to be able to recognize those and seize the moment, or if not the moment, within the next decade, to do what needs to be done to make sure we have a much more inclusive, much more robust economy. Over to you, Chintan. You'll have to unmute yourself, Chintan.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Very good. Very good. And the network here is a little shaky today, so just in case. But I think a lot of wisdom has been shared already by Anish and let's see. The second speaker's name I didn't write. Bhairavi. Right.
Chintan, is your video on?
So
because the audio is a bit choppy, so if you
I believe it's a lot of
yeah. This might just be better.
Shall we also put up our videos? No.
If I were to ask myself a question, that what are some of the best barriers to creating an innovation, a culture of innovation, I might.
Yeah, Chintan, it's still a little difficult. Is there a sort of different place in the room? Okay, we've lost him now. Let's hope Chintan can join the conversation soon. Anish, I know you might have to leave a little early, but please do try and stay as long as you can.
Yes.
And in case you do, then we're very fortunate to have Aliva with us, who's been working closely with Anish on several of the Transforming Rural India Foundation initiatives. Welcome, Aliva. Thanks for being with us. We will try and get through to Chintan if the team could start making calls right now and figuring out how we can reconnect him. Let's do that. I would like to, for the next maybe 10 minutes. Yeah.
Now?
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. Good to have you back.
I think. Yes. Okay. Let's try. Let's keep going.
Yeah, this is much better. And Chintan, you might as well start from scratch because it was a little choppy in the beginning as well.
I see. Okay. Okay. All right. Let me know if you need me to turn off my video at any point. But I agree with much of what Anish and Bhairavi said. If I were to ask myself the same question as to what are some of the biggest barriers to creating a strong culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Pat, am I coming through?
Yes, you are, Chintan. Please go ahead.
Yes. If one were to ask, what are some of the deepest sort of barriers to creating a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship? I would say I would arrive at some similar, in a way, if I could call them chasms. It is useful, it is delightful to find a family that trusts their child to do entrepreneurship over other professions. It's delightful to find a business person who believes that an academic can be entrepreneurial. It's similarly refreshing to find an academic who believes that a business person may have appreciation for depth and rigor. Similarly, very nice to find somebody in public sector who believes that large problems will require working together with private sectors. Similarly, somebody in private sector who believes that there can be people entrepreneurial in public sector as well. And similarly, between for-profit and not-for-profit, from the systems perspective, it is like saying, for instance, I don't remember ever saying that I don't like my right hand's index finger. That doesn't make sense because it's a component of a system. So all of these are components of a single system that we're trying to create. So these types of divisions are not very useful, to say the least. I think let me come to another point which sort of we alluded to, Kanika alluded to as we got started, which relates to all of this, and that is this is the question that I am most often contending with these days, having gone from being an academic at MIT to currently serving as the mission director of Atal Innovation Mission. Many of you know that Atal Innovation Mission's job is to create and nurture a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, or create an ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship. And so many of the failures and to whatever extent successes that we are talking about in that realm, Atal Innovation Mission has a role to play in that. And one of the hardest questions that I don't yet have a great handle on. I have done some work in it, and I have some understanding of it, but I don't have all the answers. Maybe I will never have all the answers. But this is the question of, where does the top-down initiatives meet the bottom-up initiatives? Or maybe I can ask it slightly differently. How can we create top-down initiatives and bottom-up initiatives such that they can work together effectively? Or maybe I can ask the same question slightly differently also. What has to happen at the interface of top-down initiatives and bottom-up initiatives, right? And I'll give you a quick concrete example, so we're not talking in abstract about this thing. But imagine, so imagine the solar-powered access to solar-based, solar-powered innovations in rural India, right? You can think of this as a, there are at least two parts to this. One way to do it is a top-down method of creating microgrids, where you build these rural microgrids, and you take care of things like equity and capacity and all of that in your design. And as the government, or even as a private sector with that has a lot of money, can come in and build these microgrids. It's a top-down method, right? The other way to do it is to say, I'm going to build a bottom-up approach. So I'm going to build one solar power installation at a time, household-based, from entrepreneur to entrepreneur. They're going to use this solar power for whatever it is that they do. Maybe they do tailoring, they do, some other agricultural work that needs power and so on, irrigation, whatever. But I'm going to build it bottom up, one instance at a time, right? And you ask a question, what are the pros and cons of these two approaches? And one way to think about it is that, for instance, there are certain things that are easier for the top-down approach. For example, if you're a private sector, large private sector entity, influencing the government, you have the resources, is easier. Providing deep discounts to people initially for adoption and all that is easier. Raising investments through your other networks is easier. This is a much better done if you were a large private sector company. There are several things that both top-down and bottom-up initiatives can do roughly equally well, or at least if they have the intention, there's a way to do it. They can build such infrastructure. Both are possible. Oftentimes, this is just the applications may be narrow in the sense that they can both provide narrow applications like I will light your light bulb, or I will charge your cell phone, or whatever. Both of them can do that. They can both do service and maintenance, top down, bottom up. They can unlock finance, link with existing government schemes. They can even be, if they are conscientious, even the top-down scheme can be very inclusive, even if it's a private scheme, if that's what you want to do. You can provide loan guarantees, you can provide gap supports, all of this. There's nothing in theory that prevents a top-down versus a bottom-up approach from achieving all of these things, right? There are some things that are difficult for both, whether you are a top-down scheme or a bottom-up scheme. These things are winning government tenders is difficult for both. And secondly, creating certification that is broadly agreed upon and all vendors kind of adhere to that standard and certification and all of that, that's difficult, whether you are a large top-down or even large bottom-up, hard things to do. Now, there is the fourth quadrant, right? This is where the bottom-up excels. In this particular example, if you're providing energy access, then you can certainly expect that once you provide somebody a plug, they're going to plug in more and more things into it. So it's not about providing a fixed quantity of energy to them, but it is about providing, catering to their increasing need for energy and having a way for them to pay for that increasing need for energy. And one way for them to do that is only if they can, their entrepreneurial journeys get better by using solar power in this example, and they can sell something better, have more. That, seems to happen better in bottom up because this person owns the infrastructure. Whereas in a top-down fashion, you would have owned the infrastructure, the central entity would have owned the infrastructure and would not have worried about whether this person is making more money or not. A car dealer that comes to my home will sell me a car, but doesn't really care whether I have a church to drive to, I have a playground to drive to, whatever, only I care for. And so in other words, there are pros and cons here. But what seems to break is that the infrastructure creation and the coming together of this top-down infrastructure creation versus bottom-up ecosystem that's coming up. Where do they meet? So let me come to now Atal Innovation Mission. So Atal Innovation.
Oops. Chintan, are you there?
Atal Innovation Mission has created and so forth. Access to at least somebody. Now, this may not be the somebody one may be focused on, but somebody's getting access.
Chintan, we're losing you again. You might just have to be very brief. Yeah. Am I audible to everyone else? Yeah, great. Okay. We'll get back to Chintan for that piece on how the Atal Innovation Mission is trying to address some of the challenges. I think we've lost him once again. I would like to connect virtually the first thing that Anish, you had mentioned, our understanding of firm size or the significance of firm size and the extent to which we need to grow the business or grow businesses in order for them to become more employment intensive, with something that Chintan had mentioned at the end, which is this interface between the top initiatives that are led from the top, either because of responsibility that governments might have or business interests that large corporations might have. Do we see the possibility of programs and schemes taking the shape of taking a shape which is more that of a platform on which let's say it's like a garden, where many plants can flourish, instead of program schemes, etc., which are very directive in nature, which prescribe or prescriptive in nature, where from the top people are told what they can do, what they can't do. Is it possible to create platforms, create ecosystems? Any thoughts on that?
But that's something, and Pat, you have been at it for such a long time, and it is something, and net it adds to our collective efficiencies. Otherwise, we are duplicating, and so many things are superfluous. Unfortunately, the kind of trust deficits we have all around, what Chintan was saying early on, that it would be great to find a bureaucrat like that, or an NGO like that, or a business like that. So that's essential challenge is in our society with low trust deficits. We have a very interesting problem. This is something all of us accept, understand that needs to be done, but very few and such opportunities have shaped up. I'll tell from my experience with working with the Rural Development Ministry, which sees itself actually like a platform ministry. And they never articulate it like that, but as you speak, so they have been for the last year and a half entering into multiple partnerships with different line departments, right from MOFP or to Tribal Welfare, MOTA, or Agriculture Department, Agriculture Ministry, and looking at how they can solve their last mile challenge. They have built their own program, very interestingly called Startup Village Entrepreneurship Program. You are engaged with it, and the program is in some ways very interestingly structured. But governments have, faith in themselves to deliver what is required, and also have, a healthy skepticism, particularly when you look at, small or poor people, but not so much for say a big deal. Big deal, and private sector is most welcome, but for the small private sector is challenge. So how do we create that space would be, there is a program called Public-Private Partnership for Intensive Agriculture Development, which is a Ministry of Agriculture Development, Agriculture Ministry program, which has worked very well. And there are what's and all, and in anything that the government does, you will find. Similarly, I see that with the National Rural Economic Transformation Project, which is a World Bank assisted project, again, ministry is looking to build in partnerships with private sector in a formal way. They're inviting private sector to come and do what Chintan was saying, ministry to provide that interface where you disintermediate both the bottom up and the top down in a manner in which you are able to increase productivity and productive outcomes there. So ministry is looking at those programs, and I see there is a increased aspiration and efforts around it. Maybe that is one area where the collective that DA is leading could look at, how do we create such opportunities for different sets of people to come and contribute with their differential and very unique value adds. This is one conversation I had long back with Verma. I said that let's look at the ground and let's see if we could come in. So, and in some ways, if we look at the terra firma is the platform. You see, end of the day, and everything has to go there. So if we start looking at some innovation is required in that space, and maybe this conversation should lead to building that kind of a approach.
Yeah, one of the things that's sort of jumping out, from many of the comments that have been made is that when we think of entrepreneurship, or more specifically when we think of enterprise development programs, the presumption that we're making is that people are weak, right? That the person who becomes an entrepreneur lacks capacity, they're weak, and therefore a certain amount of resources, capacity building measures, so on and so forth, have to be directed at that person. Bhairavi, I'd just like to come to you because you did make mention of this. What will it take for the ecosystem to start recognizing strengths? To see that the strength lies within people and to a much greater extent than we normally think.
Well, it's the same thing as thinking of farmers as burden. It's ridiculous. I mean, try and grow something in a pot. Forget the farm, and you will know that there is nothing vulnerable about that. They are vulnerable because the system that has put them, to follow certain rules have increased their vulnerability. I think we have to be very clear about the fact that if we keep looking at what is our biggest strength, I mean, India has the second largest arable land in the world. We are in 80% of produce grown in the world. We're the top 5 producers. Now, when you think of it, you understand the enterprise of the Indian farmer, because they have been in a system which is very vicious. If you think of at least 78% of the smallholder farmers. So at the end of the day, if you look at everything that is supposed to be your strength as your economic burden, right, then you are going to suffer big time, because you are not looking at the strength on the table. It's the same thing with entrepreneurship. I mean, it creates jobs, it brings in a new way of thinking, but you keep thinking, how do I help this entrepreneur? In Hindi, if I can say, iska udhar kaise karenge? Who are you to think like that? I mean, out of your mind. There are many entrepreneurship conversations that I sit on, where policymakers and politicians and legislators will come with an attitude saying, we can help them rise, and they need our help. And I'm like, you only think that they need your help because they're your new vote bank. But you're not really interested, because otherwise you would not be putting a question out there like that, because you would know what it takes to have an idea and give it a form. It's so tough. It's so tough that you would, and it's not just about the system that is around you, but it's about your own self-belief and the kind of social conditioning around this in our society, which has been really dismal until recently. I mean, thank God for the Facebooks of the world and the WhatsApp systems where, people share ideas and people share, you have to live in a rural context to understand what that means. But at the end of the day, I think when we think of a system, and that system has to have the individual at the center of it. You cannot think of a system in terms of group rights anymore. People only resort to group rights when individual rights are compromised. And I think so we have to understand, that's what I keep saying, we don't have a better time than it has ever been to augment that individual agency. And the first step of doing that is to say that the individual is at the center of this, whether it's rural development, whether it's agriculture, whether it is tribal affairs. We want to box people. You're a rural woman, you are a rural man of tribal background, you're an SC. We're so easy to group people. You talk about agriculture reforms. I live in a place where if I go to the horticulture department here, they distribute seeds based on caste. And since the ST are in larger number in my area, as a general category, I get mooli ka beej, which doesn't have much yield. So I'm trying to explain to you that, all great things are fine and the thoughts in Delhi. And I have been there also. But I think there is so much disconnect in our dissemination system in terms of respecting the citizen as a consumer, as your customer, as your partner, as your strength to achieve your targets, your development. Once in a while, as Chintan was saying, you will find these amazing officers, sometimes junior, sometimes senior, who will be in our administration system. But those are rare. And why is that rare? That's the question. That means somewhere the system is failing. And I don't think you have a generation today that is going to be as patient with a failing system as the previous generations were. That is something that we must know is the biggest risk we face as a country today.
Yeah. On that note, of disconnect, Chintan, I'm going to check again to see whether we're connected. Can you hear what we're saying?
Yes.
Wonderful.
I can hear you. Can
Wonderful.
You hear me?
Wonderful. And in addition to anything else you might wanted to add, I just wanted to carry forward that point about the disconnect between institution and individual. Government, of course, being the most significant of institutions. But do you see any way in which that can break down, where entrepreneurship is something that does need to be dealt with by institutions, cannot be so institutionalized in its approaches, and can actually be more nurturing or allow more freedom of action?
Yeah, can you ask the very last part of what you were saying?
I was just wondering whether, as a body of government, for example, the Atal Innovation Mission needs
entrepreneurship. Yeah. Go ahead.
It was whether we can break out of institutional constraints when we're talking about entrepreneurship ecosystems. The Atal Innovation Mission works largely with institutions, right? So,
yes. Well, no, I think let me reframe your question a bit.
Sure.
The question is, when can we break out of the institutional context? When we will be able to break out of the institutional context? And I think we will be able to, well, I mean, this really takes us to Ronald Coase, doesn't it? It's really, we're asking a question, why do we need an institution? And I think institutions exist in theory to reduce the transaction costs, as just going to Coasean thought. And when the transaction cost goes down sufficiently vis-a-vis an individual's capability and resources, of course, then I think we can move from being more institution dependent to individual dependent. That is one way to think about it. Again, I'm not trying to go against the grain. I mean, one can think of a very different design. But can you hear me, Pat? Am I still coming across?
Yes, you are, Chintan.
Yeah, but see, what I feel is that in our case, with the Atal Innovation Mission, for instance, first of all, you made one statement which I was a little woken up by. You said that we assume that the person is weak, and therefore they need all this help. And I see it slightly differently in that, in fact, I'd like to assume that a person is strong, but that person still has systemic barriers to doing what in their entrepreneurial journey, which would be nice to, if we can do something to lower those systemic barriers, that would be nice. So, in other words, like in the world's of most lubricated entrepreneur, the phrase that the innovator can nail it, the ecosystem will scale it. In the less lubricated ecosystem, it takes a lot more effort for individual to sort of take their idea to success. And that is where institutions, if designed right, can lower the did this come through at all? Hello.
Yeah, it was a little difficult, Chintan, but the sense we got was that there are systemic barriers that institutions can help us or help people overcome. And of course, you said if they are designed right.
That is right.
Yeah.
That is right.
Right. Good. Let's move on. We've got about 20 minutes, just about 20 minutes left in the conversation, and I did want to, take cognizance of a few questions that have come in from the audience that has been listening to us very patiently. The first is around risk, and it's a question or a comment by Dr. Joy Deshmukh Ranadiv, who says the entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship hinges around the ability to manage risk. And it's almost by definition that Dr. Deshmukh is making that point. If we were to look at it from a risk management perspective, then what are the challenges, or what can be done to address risk? And if I may add, a thought here to just sort of set the ball rolling in terms of whatever response the panelists would like to give. I think one of the points that has come up in the discussion is that risk management is not something that would happen on a one-to-one basis. No kind of enabling framework could deal with this on a one-to-one basis, and therefore you need the kind of ecosystem that lowers risk for everyone, and makes entrepreneurship, job creation that much more easy. But any quick comments, Anish, Bhairavi, Chintan, on that?
I can come in, Pat. See, risk return investment in some ways go together. And there is a relationship between them. And while ecosystem can, obscure and make some of those relationships more in favor of the small and entrepreneurial participant, but some of it we have to live with it. I'll tell you some of the experiences that we have had. And for example, collectivization is one way of pooling risks at a different level, and then you actually get into a different risk category. This we have done with the small enterprise of poultry, which is very volatile on both on the input and output price front, and also on the supply of raw material front. It is one of the most volatile industry that we have in the agro and allied space. So what we did was to pool the risks at a scale where the risks become more manageable. So that is one way of when we work with the small farmers to look at it. The other is some people have started looking at is to reduce on the input and fixed cost side. So for example, a zero budget natural farming and Honorable PM is so it is a innovation. It is a process innovation. And it has we face as society right from climate change and other fronts. But again, there is another way of managing risk is looking at the inputs and the fixed cost in again very innovative manner. So there is a bit of process innovation that is required. And there is a design innovation that is required. Apart from what you said, ecosystem and would play a role in it. And as a livelihood practitioner, I have found the construction of the intervention itself the most critical. And I speak from NGO experience of working in the communities. That I have found to be a very critical ingredient to mitigating risks.
Bhairavi, any thoughts? Otherwise, we could go to the next question. Chintan, were you saying something?
I was just going to underscore one thing. The risk mitigation already Anish talked about. But I want us to appreciate one thing, that innovation ecosystem is the avenue through which our nation takes risk in the first place. In other words, other institutions of our nation are all risk averse, if you think about it. Industry is risk averse, government procurement is risk averse, of course, families are risk averse, well, maybe for good reason. And so it is really this ecosystem where at least a good number of young people are able to take risk. So that's just wanted to underscore that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Bhairavi, any other thoughts? Otherwise, I will ask for your views on a second question by Mr. Chidambar Nathan, who wants to know why we don't count jobs created within the family by women entrepreneurs, especially post-pandemic, where they've seen when men returned home, they got employed by the women in the family. So on either of those subjects, any quick comments?
Well, I'm going to answer this in a couple of different parts. First is on the risk. I think it's important to understand that risk at different level is different for the stages of entrepreneurship and the growth. So that's first. I think just clubbing everything as one risk is not good for the system. And that's where sometimes size helps, because you can then understand how a certain size of entrepreneur venture can impact the society or not impact. Is there a risk to the commons, if you will? But apart from that, I think every enterprise will face a market risk, irrespective of its size, whenever it's going to introduce a new product. For example, take Tata Nano, for example, right? So it really, in fact, is about how have you equipped the understanding of risk in the entrepreneur itself. And I think there a lot of work needs to be done, especially in smaller towns and rural area, because that understanding of risk from a finance perspective, from a market perspective, is not there. Secondly, as Chintan was pointing out, there is an innovation ecosystem and which has a high risk kind of a aspect to it, right? And I think it's important in every sector to identify the kind of ventures that need that kind of risk capital and make sure that those operate in a very different scenario altogether. So, if there is an introduction of a new technology shift, or there is an introduction of a new market shift, can those particular set of ventures in those sectors also get the benefit that an innovation ecosystem enterprise gets, right? And therefore, of course, then defining what we consider as innovation. I think the Atal innovation mission is pretty broad based in that. So, that's a good start, if you will. But has that understanding come down at the individual level where it gets executed? We really have to see. In terms of, men returning back and women giving jobs, I would always say one thing. I think we have to, as I said before, we have to remove all this understanding that we have about identities that we have associated to entrepreneurs and throw them out of the window. If we truly want to give due justice to every entrepreneur, irrespective of where they come from. Having said that, when you're a female entrepreneur, you have certain system principles that are set against you, which means it's easier for a men to get finance than for you as a woman. If you are from a certain community, if you're from a certain region, I mean, there are systemic things that we need to resolve to make sure that these identities are not associated. But I would go back to very simple thing. I don't know if you're and everybody, Anish, you must have seen, of course. Most rural shops will have 1 rupee sachets of shampoos. Okay, Kevin Care started it in 80s. And in one house, you will see the mother, the daughter, the mother-in-law using different brands even, right? That's how the preference of individualization is in a common Indian. And the market got to it. Today, 78% to 80% of all shampoo sales in India are in a sachet. So all I'm saying is, where is the sachet version of ecosystem intervention, right? Where every entrepreneur, irrespective of where they come from, are able to take what they need in bit size, digest it, use it, and take the next step forward. I think that's where we need to go.
Pat, can I add something here?
Yes, please, of course.
What Bhairavi has said. First, I really want to second something Bhairavi said earlier, that in every industry sector, there will have to be a way for innovation to become mainstream. In other words, innovation to be solving problems that this sector is already not solving. Today, in Atal Innovation Mission's experience, the only sector that has done that successfully in a full cycle recently is the defense sector. They recognize that without innovation, they will not be able to solve certain problems that they have confronted, and they have embraced innovation in terms of creating a platform and all that. It also has a long way to go, but it has begun. So I think this mainstreaming of innovation and customization to each sector is a very important topic. I just wanted to highlight that. You can still hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and one more thing I wanted to say in terms of the bite size, sachet size innovation ecosystem. This is an announcement that I wanted to make, since this is really the right crowd for it. Next week, we are launching the Vernacular Innovation Program, which is designed, at least its aspiration is to decouple the creative expression from the language of transaction. And so I hope you'd look forward to that, and there will be more on it once we announce it.
Thank you so much, and thanks for using this opportunity, because yes, I'm sure this is the audience that would be eager to take advantage of that, and also be able to carry forward the message. We have about 10 minutes left. I did want to touch upon one thing, one of the key questions before we get to a round of closing remarks, which was to, in the first instance, recognize that lots of breakthroughs have been made. There are pockets of innovation, evidence, hard evidence now, in terms of numbers. Kanika had talked about how, if we could create just 5 new businesses in every village, you would, over a 10-year span, actually create 90 million livelihoods in the country. Right. In the Work for Progress program that we've run with partners such as Transforming Rural India over the last 3.5 years now, in just 40 villages in Mirzapur district, over 3 years, there are about 540 new businesses that have been set up, right, in just 40 villages, right? So it's certainly possible. And this is not the only one. I mean, I wasn't trying to use this as an opportunity to, say that we're the only ones that have met with some success. There are hundreds of such examples. So, quick views from the panel in terms of what it will take to replicate success. What are we missing or not doing, because of which the breakthroughs that have been made, even within many of the government's initiatives, such as the SVEP program, or private sector, social entrepreneurs. They've set up businesses that go deep into villages, but somehow while they may be growing, the kind of scaling out or replication is not happening. So quick thoughts on what we need to do.
So,
in whichever order, please. Yeah.
So, and this is a very interesting thought that Kanika had, and you have reinforced that. But in my mind, this question has always been there. In each village, you had a flour mill, oil presser, and someone, providing that service. So you had those, 6, 7, 8, 10 enterprises. Maybe you would call that a semi-feudal Jajmani system, which as we modernized, we have escaped that. But we have to also see how those systems that existed hitherto have broken into new things, and maybe the new technologies where we was talking about better transport, better connectivity, and addresses some of this. To my mind, and I like to bring in Aliva also, I know on this, she's a practitioner on ground. To my mind, the work that DA, and I had the good fortune of seeing it myself, in some ways it is the mass flourishing that Phelps talks about. And that is all a system play and the culture play there. And some way, if we are able to, kaun banega business. So all this is a culture play and a system play. And if we are able to bring it down to bytes, it will work. And there is no alternative other than going on the ground and working with the community. That's how I perceived. Aliva, you would like to build from your experience here?
Yeah, I'll just take probably a minute or so to describe. So I'll come with a more personal experience. I'm married. I'm Odia, married to a Sindhi guy. So, I am not a natural risk taker. I perceive myself, I'm very calculative and, take very calculated decisions in my life. But, my partner, he was born and brought up in a Sindhi family, he has seen like people taking risk at every point of life and is a natural risk taker. So, it is all about conditioning. I have always seen my parents, going to work, getting a salary at the end of the month. So I was probably conditioned in that manner. But Neeraj had a very, my partner had a very different perspective to life, and he is more, risk taker. So like, Anish touched upon it, that it's more about, grooming. We have never been taught in our schools about entrepreneurship. So why don't we introduce that as a course in the school itself? Why aren't the kids taught that, entrepreneurship is an alternate career pathway? Why don't we see a massive shift around skilling leading to formal employment? Why don't we, tell that, they can be skilling programs leading to entrepreneurship? So yeah, basically it is all about conditioning, grooming, nurturing the young mind so that they know about all these alternate career pathways. And where we again, had touched upon, these counseling missing. So in urban, to some extent, there are peers, there are alumni networks. We have options to reach out and understand. But in rural areas, these are the things that are missing. The counseling ecosystem is missing over there. There are no mentors to provide them. So maybe we can look at all those missing ecosystem and provide them. And then I'm sure we won't really need a lot of government schemes, a lot of funding, and people are just going to realize their own potential, the latent entrepreneurship within them, and come up with various ideas which probably any one of us would have thought about. Yeah, so that's from me. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Aliva. And I really like the way you put it, Anish, that it's a culture play and a systems play. Incidentally, when I was referring to 5 new enterprises every year per village, I wasn't implying, or certainly wasn't the intention to imply, that these are self-contained economies at the village level. We have in one of the Mirzapur villages, for example, there are 2 women who run a battery-powered rickshaw business, which runs all the way into Mirzapur city and takes people across the temple network. There's another lady, Asha Devi, who's become an aggregator of vermicompost producers, and she's found a market.
Track pants.
beg your pardon, the jacket. Yeah, the jacket and the track pants. Yeah. So
jacket and the track pants.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I caught exactly what you were saying, but the vermicompost story, this now is sold into urban nurseries and baggaged and sold on Amazon as well. You know, it is much more, and I think several of you have referred to that, that the verticality of business models is breaking down. Right, there are entrepreneurs there who have 3 or 4 different kinds of businesses they do that all hinge on festive occasions. The wedding season for them is really big because one is a caterer, one is a makeup artist, one does tent decorations, and they're all networked now, right? So you know, the vertical business models are sort of breaking down, and at least we've seen in those localities, it's much more networked now, as has probably always been the case. Local businesses in India have been phenomenally well networked. If I could just offer an opinion, I think it's that the development sector and you know, the government as well has probably not seen or not been able to respond to that kind of a networked you know, arrangement, and have been limited to you know, what we can deliver. Bhairavi, you've been waiting patiently.
All of this is music to my ears, so I'm so happy to listen to it.
Yeah.
I only have one thing to say. As people who may have a seat at the table to shape the system, we need to listen better.
Mm-hmm.
When we listen better to the ground, then some of our preconceived notions may go out of the window. And like Aliva said, we may think of empowering the people on the ground to chart the course that we earlier thought they couldn't, and prepare the system for that kind of a course to succeed at most. At the same time, when we listen better to the systemic shifts that are happening in the world, then our ability to create systemic risk mitigations for some of the most vulnerable it's like, when a fruit tree is growing in the first 3 years, in Parihar, they cover it with like a little bit of a kata so that it doesn't catch frost.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make sure that we hear from the systemic shifts and make sure that our entrepreneurs don't catch the frost before it's time for them to, fruit to success. And I think the only request I have to others who are entrepreneurs and who are listening to this, that do not believe that you don't shape the system. Because wherever you are, when you have decided to materialize an idea into a product or a service and found even at least one customer to buy it, even once, the shift has already started. And I think that's where I would like to end. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Don't go away just yet. We might ask you for a final few remarks. Chintan, if I could put you on the spot a little, and hopefully the connection will still work. You would have already seen from the Atal Innovation Mission's vantage point that there are breakthroughs being made, right? There are change makers who are changing the way things are done, and I'm not just talking about products and technologies but processes as well. What from your point of view needs to be done in order for those breakthroughs to gain much more wider traction?
Yeah, so yes, I do see in the last few months, after the second wave settled down a bit, my focus has been to go on the ground and spend time with people, that's innovators, various other stakeholders who are contributing to how the journeys of these innovators is progressing. And at one level, one can say that there's a lot of effervescence. Every day I have a lot of good news to hear in terms of people doing interesting things. For example, there were these 4 kids, or 5 kids from 5 different parts of our country who were all ATL, Atal Tinkering Lab students. And they came together in a few competitions. And ultimately, more recently, after they moved on from schools and are now in their first year of college, they've built a solution called SAF Water, which is a water quality detection solution, which has generic sensors, but it has a very sophisticated algorithms that they wrote on top of it. And they went on to win the IBM's Code for Change challenge, which is about $200,000. First Indian team to win it. And from 5 different parts of the country coming together. And also it's very, very interesting to see that such things are happening. For me, I think this, the replication question, I have to say, I haven't yet arrived at least at a formula for it. There are several models that one can study. For example, Amul was replicated when it became NDDB, you know. So it went up and then got replicated, for instance. That's one method of replication. If I look at Atal Tinkering Labs, what I'm seeing is that there was one very fascinating example of the Bangalore's Air Force School in Hebbal. Their students created a program called Tinker Champs. It's a club where they teach other students how to make things and so on. And that club has taken roots now in several schools all across India where people are running with the same template. What is fascinating is that many of these kids have put together programs to teach their teachers about technologies. So it is really very interesting that sort of type of empowerment is happening. Now, is it happening all across? Not really. And there again, one has to be a little careful also as to not to thrust their own strong opinions on people, onto people, in the sense that there is a little bit of a self-selection going on in terms of who wants to do what. And so we're in that sense, again, we're walking this fine line of what one wants to do or top down in terms of replicating things versus what one wants to what one wants to let it happen bottom up in a more organic fashion. That fine line is really for me the real question. This whole idea of 5 entrepreneurs a village also is, again, the moment you say that, I think what is interesting is that you'll give somebody a yardstick and say, okay, let me create 5. But then what have those 5 done to, for the ecosystem further and all that? So these are that's how I see it. But again, I really have to say no silver bullet from my side in terms of replication. Lots of ours that there's a battery of sort of approaches, but again, no single approach that at least I have converged upon.
Thank you. And maybe it's a wrong question to ask, or a wrong expectation that things will get replicated. I was somehow, as you were all speaking, reminded of a book by V.S. Naipaul. I think either the title or somewhere in the book it says 1 million mutinies now. And the nature of each mutiny might be different. It's not that we have to create one model and then spread it all across the country. Wonderful. We've actually come to the end of the conversation. Probably have something like 90 seconds or so to go, and I'd like to make sure that we don't get cut off or run out of time totally. So I would want to at this stage thank all of you, Bhairavi, Anish, Chintan, Aliva. And the participants who've listened to us, sent in a few questions. But in the time also, thank you very, very much. In the time that we have left, any final thoughts, concluding remarks that the panelists might have? Takeaways for all of us. Again, in whichever order you'd like to go.
All right, I'll go first.
Please, Bhairavi.
I think I already said it. We need to listen better. We need to empower people with decision-making capabilities. And we need to believe that the size, the scale, the market, the product, the industry, the sector they choose, they've chosen in the best of their knowledge. And we must not thrust our ideas of scale or success on them. And I think that all comes when you listen better.
Thank you. Thanks. Anish? Chintan?
Okay, so well, first of all, thank you, Pat.
You know, some
Yeah.
So, looks like there's a delay here. So, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, Pat. It's always wonderful to learn from the work of development alternatives. And today I've also gotten a chance to meet a few people you work with. I think we've said what we wanted to say, so I don't again have a single thing that I could offer to people, but I would say that personally I feel that many of these things that we are aspiring to seem doable if we can work together.
Wonderful, thanks. Anish?
with what Bhairavi and Chintan said, both together important. I'll just add one, without that, it feeds on ground. So let's, so that is something that, one message, if we could carry forward and start engaging on ground on these issues, we'll see the enterprises.
Thank you, Anish. I'd like to thank you all once again. I can see some of the people from our next panel are already here. Good afternoon, RP. Good to see you. Yeah, we'll just take another 30 seconds. I found it quite fascinating, how having started the discussion with the hope that we'd come to, straightforward solutions or prescriptions in terms of, what the future of micro entrepreneurship in the country should look like. I think all of you, our panelists, took us back to, underlying values, principles, processes, back to the basics of what we have to get right for any kind of entrepreneurship to flourish. So thank you all panelists for that. And with those words, I'd like to close this session and continue into the next, which hopefully all of you would stay back for. It's a session that now looks not so much at entrepreneurship from an individual point of view, but more at collectives and clusters and what difference they can make in terms of our ability to bring livelihood security into people's lives. So thank you very much. Over to you, Parul, or straight to Kanika, I guess, who will introduce our next moderator and the panel. Thank you, everyone.
So a lot of takeaways for me personally from the previous session. It was wonderful to know. It was wonderful to go into the depth of looking at people's aspirations, looking at what are the real cultural barriers that exist towards enabling entrepreneurship at a larger scale. I think the conversation around the interface of where the top-down schemes and the bottom-up initiatives meet. I think our wealth of knowledge is sort of really increased, and I think each one of us is also looking forward to much more greater collaboration among actors. While the previous session was more about individual aspirations, looking more at building a cultural mindset towards entrepreneurship, there remains so much wealth that exists in our culture that cannot be ignored and must not be ignored. Whether it's the existing indigenous practices or skills that have wonderful products that can be built, or the value addition that can happen at the farm level, collective enterprises have a very strong role to play in not only nurturing local economies and making them much more resilient, but also in enhancing at a very large scale livelihoods as well. We have with us again an esteemed panelists, but before I hand over to our moderator Prema, I'd just like to share a little bit about her. I've again had the privilege to know her for the last couple of years and have worked with her, and also have sort of sounded off many ideas as well. Prema has over 30 years of experience in social mobilization, rural economic development, entrepreneurship, and livelihood empowerment. She has been involved in program design, program management, and policy advocacy. She is the former head of, she's a former United Nations official where she served as assistant country director and head of the poverty program at UNDP India. And while providing consultancy to many other international organizations, we also are lucky that she works with us as an advisor to our entrepreneurship program, but also at a global level provides advisory to the Work for Progress program, which looks at social innovation and entrepreneurship leading job creation. Prema, over to you to take the session forward.
Thank you, Kanika, for the introduction, and it's my pleasure to facilitate the conversation today with the distinguished group of panelists here. Gauri Gopal Malik, we have Ayush Kasliwal, we have Sachin Joshi and Pratap Singh, and I'll come to the introductions in a while. I think we're having a conversation at a time when we all know that unemployment and job losses are on the rise, and they're pushing millions of women and men and already disadvantaged groups into the margins, both economically and socially. We're also talking at a time where aspiring young adults, men and women again, boys and girls, are looking for opportunities that lead to constructive engagement and employment. And it is in this context that we're looking at clusters of artisans and farmers as an emergent ecosystem for resilient local economies. So we're looking at about 5,000 to 6,000 existing clusters, and we're also looking at how more and more can come up in the near future as sites for generating jobs for people where they live and for people who have deep roots in their craft and the land they till. And they have immense pride and sense of identity associated with what they do. And before I think starting, we thought we'll bring Jayanti from the LAC cluster in District Gumla of Jharkhand, and to talk to us and share her ideas on how she's looking at her cluster as it grows and brings economic prosperity, not just to the members, but also to the region. So if Imran, if you can help us listen to Jayanti from Jharkhand.
आप सबों को जोहार। मेरा नाम जयंती तोपनो है और मैं कोटमो गांव की हूँ। अभी हमारे यहाँ एक क्लस्टर बना है उद्यम उत्थान समिति, तो इसमें अभी हम लोगों का 500 महिला जुड़ी हुई हैं और 500 महिला जुड़ के मतलब 100 महिला अभी यहाँ ला और अन्य वनोपज प्रोसेसेस में, और मैं यहाँ अध्यक्ष हूँ। अभी और भी महिला जो गांव में जो हैं उन महिलाओं को जागरूक करके और यहाँ तक जो भी हम लोग पहुँच पाए हैं और किस तरह से हम लोग और अच्छी तरह से काम करेंगे, यही मैं उनको सुझाव देती हूँ। प्रोडक्ट हमारा यहाँ बन रहा है ला, चिरौंजी और इमली। अभी हम लोग मतलब इस मार्केटिंग मतलब इस हमारा जो प्रोडक्ट है उसको अभी हम लोग ब्लॉक स्तर से और जिला स्तर से भी हम लोगों ने इसे एडवर्टाइज भी किया। अभी हम लोगों मतलब यहाँ काम करके हम लोग मतलब स्वतंत्र हो गए हैं कि हम अपने ऊपर जो भी हम लोग पहले हम नहीं खरीद पा रहे थे वो चीज अभी हम लोग खरीद के अपने बच्चों को भी दे रहे हैं और अपने लिए भी हम लोग कुछ कर पा रहे हैं। महिलाओं से अनुरोध करते हैं कि वो जागरूक हो और अपने मतलब घर से थोड़ा बाहर निकले और अपने आप को सक्षम बनाने का कोशिश करें। धन्यवाद।
So that was Jayanti from the LAC cluster in Gumla, Jharkhand. And this is a cluster, as we know, as she said in Hindi, so I'm just translating a little bit. It's a cluster with 500 women, all tribal. And it's been supported and developed with the support from Udyogini and Development Alternatives. The cluster is involved in producing lac, chironji and tamarind, and the women are not only designing the products but also adding value for selling it in the market. It is one of the 23 clusters under the Spurti program, the flagship program of the Ministry of MSME. And these have been managed by IMEDF, which is Indian Micro Enterprises Development Foundation, which is the nodal agency for the Spurti scheme. And it's a Section 8 company under Development Alternatives Group. We'll now carry this conversation forward with our esteemed panelists who have joined us today, and I introduced them very briefly by their names, and I have the honor of introducing them in detail. Gauri Gopal Malik, she began her career as an investment banker, but 2 years into her job, she followed her heart and founded the Skilled Samaritan Foundation in early 2012. Sirohi, the trademarked brand of the foundation, is a sustainable luxury brand of handcrafted homes and lifestyle products. Her vision is to build a micro-entrepreneurship platform with the objective to foster gainful employment and financial independence for women who have limited or no income opportunities, so they too can lead a life of dignity and respect. Pratap Singh is a social entrepreneur and a conservationist. Starting with the venture Chambal Safari, a successful eco-lodge attracting tourists from across the globe, he then got involved in setting up of the Chambal Agritech Incubator producer company that aggregates agriculture products such as olive, varieties of tea and mustard, and markets them across India. He's also the regional convener of Intact Agra chapter and member of the River Watch Group, has been associated with the Uttar Pradesh Tourism Promotion Board and the UP State Wildlife Board. Sachin Joshi is at UNIDO and heads the Facility for International Cooperation on Inclusive and Sustainable Industrial Development. Sachin is a sustainability professional and has been consulting for public and private sector. He has been the policy director of B20 during Saudi Arabia's presidency of the G20 in 2020 and is now helping relevant agencies prepare for India's presidency of the G20 in 2023. He has also led CII's Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development. And coming to Ayush Kasliwal, he is India's leading design thinkers, practitioner and advocate for artisans. He is the co-founder of AKFT and Anantya, interdisciplinary design companies based in Jaipur. All aspects of the business practices of these companies reflect social consciousness and sustainability. Through inclusive business practices, he redefines ancient local craft traditions and artisan communities by providing design, technology, capital, and creative collaboration. He works in multiple ways, from small batch manufacturing to artisan-driven orders, finished at his factory, to interiors and large-scale on-site installations throughout India. So welcome to all the panelists, and I think I'll just give a little bit of background on what we are planning to explore in this 1-hour discussion. We are looking at exploring the ability of collectivization effort through clusters in aggregating and adding value to local produce, making them competitive, and providing support for their long-term sustainability and economies of scale. We're looking at collectivizing approaches and business models, especially those that turn communities and their organizations into thriving centers of value creation, and with opportunities to work at different points and even higher points of the value chain. We're also going to explore policy shifts that are needed at micro, meso, and macro levels that create an enabling architecture for collectives and encounters the dominant top-down approaches and processes, which is something that we discussed in the previous session also. And finally, we'll explore possibilities to infuse innovations within cluster development initiatives, ways to combine indigenous resources, skills, and wisdom with cutting-edge technology, and to look at support systems that can stimulate collaboration between the different actors, facilitating agencies in a manner that it leverages more resources for the clusters. So against this backdrop, we'll start with Gauri and Ram Pratap, both of who are entrepreneurs in their own right and are closely associated with developing clusters in rural Uttar Pradesh. So Gauri, I'll first invite you to share what propelled you in this direction, what made you make this major shift, and how did you and the women, you work with primarily women from marginalized community. So how did you all navigate the social, the cultural, and the economic terrain to bring the cluster to where it is now? It's an all-women collective, and it is that grew during COVID times. So over to you, Gauri.
Thank you, Prema, and for inviting me for this panel. Again, at par with like veterans from the space. So I'm really humbled and honored. So my journey starts from, I'm from the city called Muzaffarnagar in Uttar Pradesh, and that's where it starts from. I went to a boarding school when I was 6 years of age. And have had a relatively independent, upbringing, going to a boarding school so young. So while I was there, every time I would come home for my holidays, I would see my mother very financially, emotionally dependent on my father. And this is something I noticed was the plight of women, and still is the plight of women, whether they're in rural, urban homes. And this dependency has always been there. The women that I work in Muzaffarnagar district are essentially, women who have been married very young when they were, 13 to 15 years of age. They lack an education. They were not they've not been educated. So they're very limited in opportunity. So the employment pool is very restricted for them. But these are women who are amazing in, craft, very skilled. They're from minority groups. And they're determined. They want to make a difference to their lives. They want to bring about change. So essentially, the idea is that, for us, it was that how do we essentially, use the existing skill sets of women, leverage those to make products which are well designed, utilitarian, and at par with any other premium brand that there is out there, while creating, impact and livelihoods for these women. So that's how we initially started. We started our work with just one woman because everyone else said no. The area that we work in, Muzaffarnagar district, women essentially thought that they were not allowed, to work. And because of that, one woman said that I will work behind the closed doors of my home. You give me work. So we started with one, and now we work with over 750 plus artisans in the area. So what we decided to do was that, we started our work in October 2020 with one woman, 37 products, and, Sirohi has grown since, only because, we have been able to leverage technology excessively. And we, sort of worked within the existing resources that existed for the community. We worked with our existing craft skills. We worked within the existing raw materials and resources that she had. We worked with essentially, what we couldn't, as a community that was so closed, we couldn't really break age-old barriers. But what we said that we can bend them, we can bring about a little bit of change there. And that's how we started. So the women that we work with are, really good with their skills in charpoy weaving. And, so we said charpoy is a product which is essentially, very traditional, not very relevant to the times of today. And I know Ayush has done multiple exhibitions and, installations, around charpoys around the country. And my first project, that I won and started and was inspired by was, something that Ayush had done, I think 2 to 3 years ago at Serendipity Arts Festival. Which is called the Charpoy Project. So the idea was that how do we take the Charpoy form of weaving and create utilitarian products for women, that are still relevant to today for a domestic and international global buyer. We started out in, 2019, late 2019, and by 2020, COVID hit. And we work in a very decentralized model where all the women essentially work in their homes. So we said that with the penetration of smartphones in the country, where 700 million Indians are online, and tens of millions are going online, as the years go by, we see this penetration where women had access to WhatsApp, YouTube, Pinterest. So what we did was we essentially, as an organization, connected with designers from across the world. And you use 3D drawings developed by designers and started sharing those with artisans on WhatsApp, taught artisans how to get on, Google Meet links and links like these to actually learn how to understand these drawings and create a product where the raw materials were sent by us. So during COVID, we transitioned our entire, backend online, where all the master artisans could essentially understand how to develop a product without anyone physically being there. The designers were never there in Muzaffarnagar, they were all sort of working online. So, what I call is, it became a digital model as such, digitally we were empowering them, physically they were, working. And of course, as a banker and, I've been surrounded by people from the tech startup space. So for me, it was very important that we operate using a very hardcore online approach where all the products that we make are sold online and a website was created. So essentially the front end and the back end of our organization of Sirohi is layered with technology, and the products are essentially catering to a buyer across the globe. So in terms of I think technology, COVID, that's how we were able to, I think, do a lot more. We saw 3x sales during COVID. We onboarded, I would say, 350 plus artisans during that time, when a lot of artisan clusters were seeing losses because they were very dependent on offline market, on exhibitions, pop-ups. So that's how it was. And I think, having done a little bit of research, I've understood that unfortunately, India contributes to, just about 3% of the global handicraft markets, and most of it is, you would say in Bangladesh, Africa, Sri Lanka. And why is that so? Because I mean, the second largest, employment generating area is the artisan economy in India after agriculture. So why are we such a small contributor to the global market as such? So I think having understood some of these, having understood some of these challenges, I think leveraging technology and really bringing the cottage industry online is the way to go and solve for some of the problems where you can replicate what we're doing and plus give access to women, because there are lots of women, a lot of talented artisans also, who are limited because they can only work in their homes. Just because they're working in their homes does not essentially mean that they should not get an opportunity, right? And that's the kind of problem that we're aiming to solve at Skilled Samaritan, which is the foundation, and Sirohi, which is essentially the brand of the organization.
Thanks, Gauri. And I think you raised a very we've been discussing since morning, why are jobs not getting created? Why are there only losses? And I think brought onto the table is that you've been able to connect the many dots. I mean, you had the idea, you had the dream, you were able to connect with the women who had the determination, which was not visible, and they had craft skills. And I think it could have stayed there. But I think you were able to, and that's the kind of things we're looking at, how do you bring in technology, the knowledge, the markets, and, have benefits going more and more to the producer. And we'll talk more about it as we go along. And I'll bring here Pratap Singh here, who's working with farmers looking at traditional crops like mustard, but also at olive, which is an introduced crop in India. Starting with Rajasthan, and now we hear it's moving into UP and other states also. So Pratap, if you could share with us your journey of bringing entrepreneurial energy to the region, which is not the best of places to start a business, and your vision and work on the organizing of the producers, and if you could also share what factors and support systems help unlock the potential of farmers and opens opportunities for them to move up in the value chain. In your case, it's to do with agriculture produce. So Ram, if you could.
Thank you, Prema. I hope everybody is able to hear me.
Yes.
So before I go on to the Chambal Agritech Incubator enterprise, I would go back in time to 1999 when I moved back to Chambal. And Chambal, as you said, was not one of the best places to be then, certainly, with bandits all around. But the challenges for me, I came back to my ancestral village with no business plan, no ideas in particular. I just had inherited some land and I wanted to do something productive with that. When I got back, I realized that there was a tremendous potential for ecotourism in the Chambal, because the Chambal River supported a huge biodiversity, and avian biodiversity and reptilian biodiversity. And so there was something that could be showcased. But there were challenges. The biggest challenge was not from the bandits or from the outlaws. The challenge was from the mining or the illegal mining lobby that was operating in Chambal at that point in time. And while we are trying to introduce ecotourism, the miners were taking away the valuable sand from the sandbanks of Chambal for being used for construction purposes, and that was destroying the ecosystem completely. As quickly I would like to tell, these sandbanks are the habitat where the gharials and the crocodiles nest, and many bird species in and around Chambal make their open nests on these sandbanks. Now these miners had a modus operandi. They were not from the area, but they employed local people. So they had a decent support within the local community, and the local community was, in a short-term perspective, able to make decent revenue from these miners. So for me to wean them away from a profitable daily wage kind of a scenario was a big challenge, and to explain to them that this mining operation was not going to last forever. I mean, they're going to take away our resources and then they are going to leave the place. And of course, our water tables were going down at a devastating rate of about 10 to 20 feet per annum. That was the rate at which the water table was going down. And we are in the middle of, to put our location geographically, we are on a duab of Yamuna in Chambal. South of us is Chambal and north is Yamuna. So in that scenario, the tourists started coming in, we started employing local people, and slowly, it was a long journey. It took good 10 years for local community to realize that there was a respectable, as a miner, the police was always after them, and they were getting arrested and they were getting into all kinds of litigation. But when they slowly, the people who chose to move to tourism with me were getting a good livelihood, earning more money, and also a very respectable option, and a sense of pride in the fact that people from across the world were now coming to Chambal for a different reason, to see birds. And this effort was recognized by Government of India in 2011 when we got the National Award for putting Chambal on the ecotourism map of India. And then in 2014, this enterprise, so today our cluster, the ecotourism cluster, comprises of about 100 families, which includes people who work for the ecotourism enterprise, our boatmen, our naturalists, our guides, and then our vendors and suppliers who are supplying us poultry, vegetables, all kinds of other consumables. And all this is being done in a very sustainable and reliable way, where In 2014, we were judged as the best eco-lodge across the globe. And one of the criteria for this responsible travel organization which selected us for this was that almost 70% of the revenue generated by the enterprise goes back to the community. And that's where I think we score well. So just to sum up this story, so today Chambal is if you look at any of the European itineraries or American itineraries for bird watching and for wildlife photography in India, Chambal is almost on all the itineraries. We are getting a few thousand international travelers before the pandemic happened, and quite a substantial number of travelers from within the country. We've been running very successful training programs with community children, our local villagers. So all that is on, and then we somewhere hit a plateau where ecotourism by definition is not a mass tourism kind of an exercise where you beyond a point, if you have a footfall, then that it can be destructive to the very ecosystem that you are trying to protect. So some 5 years ago, we hit a plateau where we couldn't increase our outreach. And that got us thinking that what could be the next step? And that's where I studied the plight of the small and marginal farmers in our area, and which is no different from small and marginal farmers across the country. These are farmers with a land holding of maybe an acre, maybe up to 5 acres. The whole families are employed on their plot of land. They're not really educated in the technical sense, don't have access to much of capital. The agricultural extension services system that used to exist in the country, which was created rather in the 50s and the 60s, somehow by the 80s had fallen apart. So the chemical dealer or the seed supplier has become the know-all of all farm inputs in terms of knowledge that goes on to these farmers. And obviously he pushes whatever, pushes the technology where he can make a profit. So they've gotten into all kinds of farm practices which are not really conducive to the area. And with that background, also with such a small patch of land, on the production side, they face these problems of finance, they face problems of technical inputs and productivity. Whereas on the marketing side, I mean, they do not have the economies of scale. And as a result, they're left to the mercies of the market forces to, and they're definitely, this is one sector where the producer does not decide the price. And with that background, the idea was to create micro entrepreneurs out of these farmers. And that's when the concept of Chambal Agritech Incubator, as the name suggests, that we create an environment or a platform where small farmers become entrepreneurs and have a stake not only in the production processes, but in the processing, and also as we go up higher in the value chain on the marketing side, they should have a stake, and that should increase their profitability and their sense of belonging into the business that they are in. So at the Chambal Agritech Incubator, we started sort of a mix of going back in time and at the same time bringing in a crop which is from the future. So we are a traditionally mustard growing area. Then for some reason, a lot of people shifted to potato, which is not a very good crop in terms of soil and the degradation it is causing to the area around here. So we went back to traditional mustard, and for which for 2 years, we set up a demonstration unit where I was able to prove to my partner farmers. And so this Chambal Agritech Incubator is a farmer producer company organization, and it has about 610 partner farmers. And the equity is not in terms of money. The equity in a FPO comes in terms of how much land you commit towards the operations of the company. And then we all collectively, individually farm it, but collectively we are able to give in the technical inputs, collectively procure. So if we have to procure seed as 600 individual farmers, we will end up paying an MRP. But when we procure seeds for 600 farmers together, we are able to negotiate. And we are able to afford experts to come in and split the consultancy cost amongst the partner farmers. So the production side, we are able to streamline. And on the marketing side, we are able to have an economies of scale where we are sitting on a big chunk of produce. And even if we are not processing it, even at that stage, we have a largest chunk of mustard crop, which we can then trade at a right price at the right time in the market. And then, of course, if we are processing under our own brand name called the Wild Chambal, then there is value addition, and the profits go back to all the partner farmers. So this is one part of it, and where we went back to natural farming. So growing mustard without chemical fertilizers, very little irrigation, and so that's yielded good results in last few years. And the crop from the future is olives, so which is not being grown in Uttar Pradesh, and even to most of you, it might sound that olives only grow around the Mediterranean region. That's what the branding we associate with. But olive is a dryland crop. It has been traditionally growing in India under the name Jaitur. It used to grow wild and finds mention in Ayurveda. The varieties, the saplings, we have introduced.
I think, Ram, I'll stop you here because I think we would like to come back to you on olives and technology. And I have I think we'll have a round of questions on that. But I think what you bring on the table today is that it's possible to look at, clusters, at collectives, at farmer producers, organizers, not just as businesses, but as responsible businesses with a strong, with a very close eye on the environment, with a close eye on, the returns going back to the community. And I think this is something that is being discussed in the cluster community, that how do we look at, incomes increasing quite a lot for the farmers, for the producers, and how are they part of the economic organization, in this case, a producer company or the Eco Lodge that you spoke about. So we'll come back to more details, but thanks for sharing your experience. And I'll now move to Ayush. Ayush, already I think Gauri referred to you as being inspired for the charpoys, and I think you work so closely with artisans on the design element of their products, and you also come with a very deep understanding of markets and consumers, and which is a big piece and not understood by all so well. And so we would like to hear from you, what are some of the breakthroughs that you've been able to see from your own experience, and also from the knowledge of what what others have been doing. So the breakthroughs are important because that's where many clusters are struggling when it comes to design and market. Over to you, Anish.
So thanks, Prema, and it's good to be in August company and listen to other people's experiences. And so I'll kind of quickly get into my starting and what my understanding of this landscape is. My training is in industrial furniture design, which means that we understand how things are produced in mass, in quantities. I studied at NID, and I was fortunate to get exposed to a lot of other crafts and design practices, from textiles and ceramics, very wide, broad understanding. NID has a very strong base in craftsmanship, or how things are made. A lot of the pedagogy is actually European and Scandinavian, where NID derives a lot of its study material from. My first brush with crafts and India was actually under Kripal Singh Ji Shekhawat in Jaipur, which is in blue pottery. He revived a lot of the blue pottery practices that had got lost. But he was also a miniature painter, and he gave an incredible insight into us as a people. An understanding that we are not part of a global market. Every market, every person has a very special understanding of history and where they are right now. So I started seeing India a little bit more in detail, and the way we as a culture interact with craft, it's not necessarily as a consumer taking it, but it's a way of life. To me, craft is not in a product. It's a process, purely. How something is made as a craft, once it becomes something, it's just a product, which could come from any source. So the understanding of process and the way people relate to how things are made. In our homes, making of a chapati is a craft. And it is these sort of micro levels of craft that bring about an appreciation and an understanding of how things are made. Somebody who's actually stitched would understand much better what it takes to make a tantha sari. So it was this relatedness that we really started, working with and amplifying in our business at Anantaya, where we were drawing not on a product, but why does it have to exist now? What does it mean to you, to your memory, to your being, to your understanding of your own self? And creating a relatedness which makes people value a product, not just as a product, but as what it means to them. And if you see very objectively, that is what we are surrounded by, things that mean something to us. Along with the story of craft and what we're talking about, sustainability, micro enterprises, is a much bigger window of how we see ourselves within the planet. And do we talk about it? Does a product or a service inspire somebody to become a better person? And in this sense, this world of craft expands hugely in the mind space of the markets. And this to us was a breakthrough because we started seeing people respond to that call, that craft is about you. It's about you who's going to use it and have an emotional relatedness with it. The story of the charpai started in a similar fashion where there was a lot of nostalgia around the charpai. But was it available? No. Did it make sense in the way it was? And how do we modify it to work today? Now, the charpai, interestingly, is one of the, is a quintessential product which ticks all the boxes for good design. It's knockdown. It's locally customizable. It's light. It is very light on resources. It has got so many things that are going right for it, but yet it's not there in the market. We consign our understanding of knockdown to IKEA. But here we had something that went far deeper, had a lot more possibility, and signaled a possible way of changing how we live, how we relate to products around us. If a person can make, craft is alive. That's a very simple thing. Have two hands, we'll make. And I think this is really a very, very important thing when we're talking about crafts, the relatedness that we establish with markets. So this was one very important breakthrough. And the other breakthrough, which is actually more of a internal mental understanding, was that between highly crafted products and highly industrialized products, we have a grayscale. It would be silly of us to think of craft as an isolated activity where people are working and doing, and it is a very romantic story. But I think to be very objective, we have to step outside the romantic story and understand that there is people, lives, their own sustenance involved, and see how do we draw on that grayscale, keeping in mind that we have to employ more and more people in a meaningful manner. We could look at very high-tech industries also, say the semiconductor industry, which currently is fully automated. Can we have greater human interaction within that? And thereby redefine the idea of craft, because you're not talking about a process, you're talking about people. So in our personal practice, we do not really make this distinction. Our only criteria is how many people are involved in the making of a product. In that sense, are we more human-centric or are we more resource-centric? And for us, this understanding and breakdown of any process, any product, into how much is going into a virtually, endless resource, which is human beings. I think we are probably the second largest mammal on the planet. And I'm not so sure, because I don't know whether there are more cows or human beings. So there are so many of us. And that is the problem. We cannot look at all of us as people who are buying and consuming. We are making things also. And how much more of a human interaction or a human component? It could be design, it could be marketing, it could be making. Making is only one part of the bigger ecosystem. It could be selling. It could be how we put it out in social media. There's a lot of human interaction that comes. So how do we maximize that within whatever resources we are consuming? And this sort of redefinition within our minds as to what we are trying to do opens up opportunities. When we work with craft, say, I'm getting something made in Almora, in copper. I have a challenge with tarnishing, suppose. it would be very silly of me to expect the artisan to set up an electrophoretic lacquering plant to take care of tarnishing because my goods are going to go on sea and get shipped to other parts of the world. We set that up in our place. So these are partnerships where what an artisan can do best, they do best. What other industrial, what other industrial processes can do best, they do best. And hereby marry the two together because there is a lot of possibility in this fusion, a lot. We would be very foolhardy, Don Quixote-ish to expect the artisan to do it on their own. It doesn't always work. It needs partnerships. And we're all part of this gigantic ecosystem, this network, where we weigh in with what we know. The middleman typically has been decried extensively. And I would say probably we are decrying the lack of emotion and intelligence at the middleman level, and not the middlemen per se. They do provide a very, very important link within this ecosystem. And then to look at craft and this entire network as a single big canvas and not isolated little pockets would be a mind shift that all of us probably need to have in a collective way to actually make that difference. We are a network and not isolated pockets.
Ayush, and I think you've also sort of brought the whole ecosystem into the discussion, and every part is important. The only thing I think we are all sensitive about is that there's no exploitation at the producer level, and I think that's where your emotional relatedness is also important, because people wonder if it's handcrafted, it shouldn't cost so much. There is a whole world which thinks like that, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think organizations such as yours is doing a lot of work there. So thank you for your inputs today. I'll move to Sachin, who's, Sachin, at Unido, you work on all facets of cluster development and also with a range of stakeholders. And as we've been talking today, we've been hearing a lot about that. But, with you, I was thinking if you could share your thoughts on the issue of innovation, on the need for continuous innovation and technology in the functioning and the growth of clusters, because you work with a range of them and for several years, and how both these inputs of innovation and technology can bring more economic prosperity to the communities. So we're looking at those kind of innovations and technologies. Sachin.
Thank you, Prema, for that question. And first of all, also thank you for having me on the panel. Great to be here. So what we heard from these three very good examples on the panel is also is an evidence of individual stories and successful ones there of the technology and innovation that can be applied for clusters to grow and succeed and sort of partly solve the problem of employment that you mentioned. Now, UNIDO works on largely on manufacturing clusters, and that too, capital goods and engineering companies and those kind of clusters. But we have also worked on clusters which are also talked about on this panel. So they could be related to crafts, it could be related to even agro products and things like that. So let me sort of talk about innovation technology related to those kind of clusters. So there's no doubt that technology and innovation is absolutely required, essential, and it definitely has a positive impact. Even Gauri mentioned how she's used technology even as basic tools as WhatsApp to get the job done during the pandemic. So there are those solutions that are available which are at mass and can be easily deployed, and it's not difficult for those craftsmen or producers to apply. So even in agriculture, there are now a lot of agri-tech companies who work with farmers using various, technology solutions to help improve the produce and what have you. But there's also another level of technology that can be deployed, which is also, say, for instance, we've done these kind of products where, say, in agri processing, you have a lot of drying and heating of the produce to do, and so you need, some kind of energy, form of energy to do that, and largely you are reliant on either the grid or other locally available energy sources, which are not necessarily environmentally friendly. So that's where we would step in and say put to use some solar-based, solutions to get that process done. The other area of technology intervention is also in product quality, consistency, and design. Both Ayush and Gauri talked about, design, so I won't repeat that. But even on product quality, one of the things that we see sort of is a barrier or a challenge that a lot of these community-based clusters and enterprises face is that there is not enough consistency in the product quality. Now, part of it has to do because they are either natural products or they are handcrafted, so there is bound to be some inconsistencies, which should be positively considered to be a plus on the product quality. But there are other grounds of product quality which need to be ensured, and that's where again there are very simple technologies that could be applied. Now, usually when we talk about technology adoption, the question really appears is this going to displace people? And a lot of these technologies that I mentioned are the ones which optimize the processes and not at the cost of people. So whether they are, those individual people who have got together to create their SHGs or cooperatives or any other structure, or they are actually employees in these kind of small enterprises or cooperatives. Those jobs usually don't get replaced by these kind of technology adoptions. As far as innovation is concerned, I would put innovation usually one, of course, on design and products. So you keep coming up with new products and things like that. But I think the challenge, which again we heard on this panel, and I'm sure you heard this throughout the day as well, is that of scale. And what goes wrong with scale is that there's not enough of business model innovation that happens. So there is a lot of potential for business model innovation. Of course, again here, say on the distribution side or go-to-market, part of the business model, e-commerce is definitely helping a lot. But there again, I think people are not really experiencing a lot of success with e-commerce as well, because especially on existing e-commerce platforms, it's not that every seller succeeds. And then the other thing is that to set up your own e-commerce platform, requires a whole different scale of resources, to be invested. So business model innovation is one that requires. In fact, the idea of FPOs is a business model innovation in itself. Clusters. There is now discussion in India, and there are also pilots going on where you have SHGs being converted into clusters. That's an innovative, idea by itself in terms of business model. So a lot of innovations, obviously in processes and products, but untapped potential for business model innovations. Finally, on product innovation, I would say that especially on these kind of products that we've been focusing on today, it's usually those products usually do not necessarily meet the requirements of the markets. There is usually a gap between what the consumer wants and what is being put on the platter there, and that's where still a lot of innovation is required in a manner that it doesn't then become unattractive to the consumer in whichever form or yardstick that you use. Whether it is in terms of its cost or in terms of its pricing or availability or anything else. But that part of product innovation is where there's still a lot of potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sachin. And I think it was, I think many clusters are struggling with the kind of technology and innovations that you talked about in terms of energy, looking at efficiency, looking at product consistency. And I think I'll come back to Gauri, Ram Pratap, and Ayush to quickly, maybe in a couple of minutes, if they have any ideas on the business model innovations, even if they are at early stage. And I think if we can bring it on the table here, this could become an area that we could keep discussing post the summit also, because that is something that is of a lot of interest to us, who work on the ground with clusters. So are there any ideas, even if they're at early stage or you've known about them from the global experience or your own experience? So maybe, Gauri, you could start. Gauri, Ayush, Ram Pratap. Any ideas on that?
Actually, this time I'd like to listen, because I think Ayush and Ram Pratap have been in this space, for decades more than I have. So I would love to learn from their understanding of business models. So, over to you, Ayush and Ram.
Just to make it
sorry.
Ram?
Yeah. So should I come in now?
Yes, Ram. Yes.
Right, so quickly, on the micro farming side, I want to make an important observation that for all these years, we've been focusing on increasing the productivity of the Indian farmer. And there is in certain crops, we are completely skewed. We are producing 100 times more wheat than we actually need. And just in this quest for increasing productivity, what is needed is to go back to efficient farming. And by efficient, I mean that the costs have to come down, the amount of water you consume has to come down, fertilizer consumption has to go down. But productivity, even if it comes down a little, does not matter. The profitability for the farmer goes up. That's on the production side. And then on the marketing side, the moment you give the farmer a stake in the value chain, and it's a long process, but this is something which you need to carry forward. And in various recommendations to the governments across the country, that they have to just get the farmers into the value chain. And if they're able to do that, I think a lot of problems of the farm communities will be resolved. Thank you.
And I'll just dip in with a few thoughts that I have. I think the craft sector has generally been over-romanticized, for many years, which has also given us the mindset of an artisan is a person who, like an animal in a zoo, is supposed to work with their hands, work into whatever. It's very nice. I think that's a big mindset change that we might have to look at and see how we can have a larger network of people who support each other. So having worked deeply in the craft sector, some of the most sustainable craft practices I know are people who provide components that are then processed onwards and taken on. So when we have textile weavers, the most sustainable ones are the ones who've got a set clientele, who produce the fabric, which is then consumed by other people to make other products and sold onwards. The entire ecosystem of making a product, selling it is massive. It really drains resources. the people who make, there's a whole cycle of investment involved, in this entire thing. So where's the investment coming in, and what form is it coming in, and how does it get redeemed over time? So it's a very big understanding that is required for infrastructure development, common facility centers. That entire thing has to be rethought, and an ownership of common facility centers should be with the artisans, which it normally is, but is it managed by them? Not always. So this is one area where we have to see how cooperative action and building of a network become very, very important, almost central to the exercise. The other thing is the challenge of communication. I know Sachin was talking about how what is offered is not the same as what a customer expects. But in this day and date, a customer's expectation is malleable. A lot of it can change by the use of right words, the use of right images. And that is a very large missing within our sector, because the general way in which our products are presented fall way short of what a customer is enticed by. So I think that is the other massive missing, which is purely in the area of communication. If you look at art, crafts, or is the act of making talked about in media? Barely. Very small fraction does actually engage in that. And also the what Sachin was talking about, business model innovation. I think that is probably the first and most important aspect of any enterprise. Who are we making for? What are we making? How long can we afford to stock it? What is the investment we can put into it? The key thing in any business, not just a craft, is how fluid you are, how quickly you rotate the stock that you have. And that is something which becomes a challenge, because in the craft sector, stock is the biggest, by far the biggest challenge that there is, because people build and stock. It does not move. It does not follow a cycle that has got some form of predictability. The idea that an artisan can go sell things in an exhibition, yes, very good, but you hit a scale very, very quickly, because as the pandemic has shown, things are highly unpredictable. And dead stock means your capability to invest in future stock is hugely limited. So this fluidity is probably a very key component within the craft sector, which is largely ignored by in most business modeling, as well as by design, by designers who design products that may or may not sell and might yield stock that is high on investment, but low on throughput. So these are a few thoughts that I have. And it is a lot of this is not just for crafts. It's also, as I'm sure Ram would know, also in the area of agriculture, because stock is the biggest problem out there as well. So I think an understanding of how money works is something which has, which is a challenge. So I think that requires a lot of management, inputs and education at basic school level. Enterprise is something that should be taught class 3rd onwards. How does an enterprise work? And this is really where I would say design needs to focus on also, is how does an enterprise work? What is the right product for the right market, and what is the right fit? A great product that doesn't sell is of no use to anyone.
Thank you, Anish. And I think and Ram too. I think since morning we've been listening to the plenary, the session before this one. We've been hearing about how we have to start young on entrepreneurship, because it's still something that we look at, as a last resort, not just, in the larger communities, but also among people who've got education. And therefore, I think that's why we struggle with things like this when we reach a stage where we are looking at clusters and all. And I think this is something going forward. I think DA would also like to take it forward, and probably we could, do some more deeper work together on this. There are a couple of questions. And maybe before we come to the question, there are just two, because they're linked to the same question that I was thinking of posing. With a minute each, if you were to look at more community-owned clusters to flourish and increase in numbers, then what would be, that one big thing that you would see change in the ecosystem around the clusters? of producers and artisans. So in the ecosystem, what would be that one big thing at this point, what you think is important? If you could take a minute each, and then we would come to the questions.
Okay, so I think I'd love to answer that one based on my experience so far. Is that I think technology, India, has recently moved from being a low-income economy to a middle income. And that's only because the kind of wealth creation that has happened in the country because of technology, education, health, all of that sort of coming online. And we've seen that, like Ayush mentioned, because of COVID and what's happening in the world, life is fairly unpredictable, but, life has to go on. So I think the dependence of the crafts and artisan sector on technology, from what I understand, has been very limited so far. And there's been a very heavy dependence on offline markets, whether it's exhibitions, trade shows, trade fairs to sell the wares, and where, 80% of India's artisan economy lost revenues, and there were COVID relief funds created, initiatives created. So I think if you're able to, really move the back end and front end, using technology, I think, we're going to be able to scale what we do here and really bring, the artisan products to a global buyer. So that's one from my end. And number two would be, I think, and I always use this really like funny example, that, Ayush mentioned that, a good product that is really not of utility to anyone is, possibly not a great product. So this is the closing sort of like little anecdote or analogy that I'm going to end with is that, when you walk into a bar, and you see a great looking guy who is very attractive, and you walk up to him, and at the end of it, he speaks well, he's wearing a great shirt, he's wearing a great pair of shoes, and the conversation too is of substance. You want to get to know the person better. I think similarly for a product, a product needs to be well designed, utilitarian, needs to understand the product market fit. So I think having like the entire values of not just being a product or it being made by an artisan, or because it's sustainable, or because it is there's impact. I think the value of a product will be 100% more if it is made according to the product market fit, what is required by an audience of today. It is utilitarian, and people buy it because they absolutely love it. And they see value in utility versus it just being a product designed by a great designer, or and just focus on the design element. So I think that's a little 2 cents from me from that aspect.
Thanks. Minute each from Sachin, Ayush, Ram.
So I'll probably go next. There are actually 3 things which are closely related to each other, which are key. One is understanding quality and the communication around quality. That is a very crucial thing, because very often a buyer would say, I need this perfectly okay with a 2 mm tolerance. Doesn't happen. So is there communication around quality, and is it documented? That is one thing which really beleaguers the craft sector. Second is consistency and the tools for consistency. If you're going to be producing something in color, what is the reference you have? And do you maintain that reference? And do you have a way of documenting what you've committed to do? And can you do it repeatedly? The third thing is being organized. People, very often people think that it's understood that we organize, but if we ask people, okay, what is the value of your inventory? People don't know. Craftspeople especially are very hesitant to organize themselves, because very often they are very engaged in the act of making. So the broad organization of whatever you have, for example, it might be designs that you produced earlier. Is it documented? These are basic management and organizational principles, not rocket science, and with the tools and technology available today are very low-hanging fruits that can be taken up. So I think these 3 are very key to understanding how at least the base that is required for the economy to spring from is solid. So these are 3 things that need to work. Obviously, with a bigger, better understanding of how money works.
Thanks, Ayush. Ram, Pratap, or who will go next?
Yeah, so I'll come in. So in the farm sector, what I feel we have to really start from the basics because there is absolute lack of awareness about the possibility of farmers coming together in whatever form, whether an FPO or a cooperative, and with some past experiences with the cooperatives, farmers are a little wary. So what we need to do is spread awareness, identify community leaders and turn them into farmer entrepreneurs, because community leaders probably draw up a certain sense of security within their community. And so just to share one example, when I was incorporating the Chambal Agritech Incubator, initially the farmers, because what is needed is I needed their bank card, bank account details, I needed their Aadhaar card, I needed their land documents. Now that's pretty much all they own. And in the backdrop of the then farm laws that were brought in, they were absolutely scared that their lands are about to be taken away. So it took a lot of effort from our side to explain to them that we were going to give back to them, not take anything away. So that awareness needs to be brought in.
Thank you. Thank you for raising the point on awareness.
Thank you.
Sachin, last to go.
Sure. So you mentioned one thing in the larger ecosystem. So I'll talk about something that has not been mentioned yet on our panel, is policy. Policy is extremely important when it comes to, it's one of the important ecosystem services to really make these, community level clusters work. One is, of course, that it's a new idea. I think, we are still trying to figure out how community-based clusters would work. Again, I want to sort of deliberately differentiate between the existing forms of, enterprises like the cooperatives and the others, from what is being tried out for, say, SHG-based clusters. So the pilots are still new. They are still being tried and tested. So we don't really have a lot of evidence on, what is really working and what are the challenges that are likely to appear. Now, in this case, why I mentioned policy is very important, because one is that policy is required to sort of address some of these challenges that these entrepreneurs with us have mentioned already. But I also see that even some of the current policies, or if not the policies, just the state's presence is actually becoming a barrier to the success of these clusters. Since we've been talking a lot about crafts, one of the things that I've always found interesting is that even the government procurement on crafts is, quite myopic, in the sense that it's as if, they were doing a charity, to those millions of artisans. And while the positive procurement in cases, when there is a mela or some festival to be celebrated is appreciated, and that's welcome. But at the same time, what it inhibits is to bring, those kind of products at the level of, any other, utility. Since, we've been talking about, these products also providing certain utility, there are a lot of the other utility products, and the two don't really come to a level because the level playing field is intentionally distorted, right? The intention is not to actually distort, but that's the mishap that happens, is the unintended consequence. So the policy has to get out of that you know, environment of treating it. It needs a special treatment, but not of the special treatment that is being accorded now, you know, and sort of move out of this thinking that crafts only work when, you know, some state or a national government organizes a festival, right? So I think that needs to change a lot. The other thing is that, which you are also aware, MSME ministry has this scheme for SHG-based clusters. And there, I hear that, you know, the ministry is facing challenges in scaling up the scheme. So I think, you know, people like us need to work together and give them some very practical solutions on how to, first of all, make the ministry utilize the money that is there at their disposal by creating exactly those, you know, policy support mechanisms, the ecosystem.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Sachin, also for, apart from policy, also talking about evidence not being available. I think that's a lot of homework we need to do ourselves. We don't have data. We don't have how many clusters are there. We're still working with huge numbers, right? And we don't have evidence of how clusters are doing the business. What are the business models that are working right now? That kind of analysis. And I think this is one takeaway from the discussion. We have 3 questions from the audience. Unfortunately, in this format, we can't see everyone. So, and also the people who are asking the question. The first question is from Shyam Sundar Jindal, Manjari Foundation. And he's asking, what is the ecosystem services? Can you share more on this? Would anyone like to share, describe the ecosystem services in the context of our conversation? Anyone could take that.
I could take it. That's
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we just spoke about ecosystem services, right, in your previous question. So any entity operates in the larger ecosystem where you have, you know, a lot of these support mechanisms. You have the upstream value chain where you have your materials coming in and things like that. And then you have also downstream where you have people who are bringing your goods to market and, you know, connecting you to the customers and all of that. Then you have, you know, other providers of, say, finance, technology, and then, of course, you have the policy environment. You know, we also spoke about middlemen at some point, right? So, and the importance of middlemen. So, when you look beyond your entity, the entire environment that it operates in, which gives us that support to flourish, is basically the ecosystem. Now, when we talk about ecosystem services, the services are exactly the ones that I mentioned, you know, market connecting services, finance, lending, technology, policy incentives and schemes, you know, all those things are basically the services that come with it. There are also people who provide capacity building, which is in our context, again, very important. So those people are also part of that ecosystem, and capacity building is the service.
I can probably add just a little bit to this. Is all entities are linked together through a network. Any service that affects and builds and strengthens the network is providing ecosystem services. There's not a single stakeholder who benefits, but everybody throughout the chain benefits from it. You know, as Sachin said, it could be things that are related to policy, things that are related to technology, which connects people. There's a whole wide host of things that are related to this, and everybody in their own sector can find out what is the missing that connects the whole chain together and get the right people to provide these ecosystem services.
Thank you, Ayush. We have one more question from, we have 2 more questions. From Priyam Bada from Access. The question is, how do we ensure these identified clusters are sustainable?
First, let us define sustainability. It's a very often used word, and it can be used and misused in various ways. So broadly, if we say what is sustainable is what can survive now and in the future without affecting the capability of that product or service affecting the future of itself. So, when we look at it within this very, narrowly, clearly defined thing, in that sense, a cluster itself, the primary idea of the cluster itself is to survive for itself, for a cluster to survive. A cluster can be defined in very many ways, one of which is what they produce. A cluster could also be where they stay. So the definition of both cluster and sustainability is something that has to be very clearly defined before we start saying whether they work with each other. If we talk about the craft sector, say, if we, hypothetically, let us take, say, Banaras as an example. Is the cluster sustainable? Where does the silk come from? It comes from China very often. Is that sustainable? That has to do with a lot of other things. So I think it's a very complex question, has to be defined in a very clear, narrow, activity-specific way for us to be true and honest about it. So I think it would require to be very, very specific to understand what we mean by these two words and what is it that is connecting them to each other.
Thanks, Ayush. And I think as we are going forward, the environmental aspects are becoming very strong from a sustainability perspective. And I think that is something that as we work on cluster development and look at these clusters which are thriving or not thriving, we'll have to look at environmental aspects. But the last question is, I think, one which we could not discuss in this session, which was about financing of the financing needs of clusters. So here there's a question by Suraj who says, what role microfinance can play in helping the artisans to be able to buy raw materials and other resources required for making products? So I think straight for Gauri in this case.
Thanks, Suraj, for your question. So, Sirohi, the model as such is that the artisans that we work with, they're not organized as a self-help group right now. Sirohi currently, the Section 8 part of our company is the one that supports the artisans in giving them access to raw materials based on the designs that we make. So that's our model. But I think in terms of SFGs and the role of microfinance, it's excessively important because it gives, artisans, people who want to work, access to certain working capital to be able to make products, and plus at the same time, become financially included in the banking system of the economy. So that's extremely important as well. In terms of, like I said, with Sirohi, the aim is that, while the artisans are associated with us, these are first-time women. They're not, I think the difference here is that these are just women who had a craft or a skill set. They weren't categorized or, they're not compartmentalized as artisans. So for them, these are women who had, a craft, a skill set, and we have sort of empowered them to first mobilize them and started with just that, would you like to work? And then it was the next step of saying that, okay, if you want to work, we will give you access to raw materials. So I think they have just graduated from becoming artisans, from being just women who had a craft skill, right? And I think the aim is that, to be able to open other market avenues and linkages for them in addition to Sirohi. And that's when I think the understanding of, a self-help group or even a microfinance sort of model will come into play, because currently, the women we work with are from minority groups and they don't even have ID cards or they don't even have bank accounts. So the first step for us as an organization has been to just get them to be part of, the economy with getting an ID card, opening a bank account, understanding, what saving is. And then, of course, the next step would be giving them access to microfinance loans. So they're able to, become micro entrepreneurs in their own right and not just be dependent on one organization, for their sustenance. So I hope that helps answer your question, but I'm happy to sort of, or talk more about it, and and you can email me on that.
Thank you, Gauri. I think since we have, do we have about 2-3 more minutes? Arul or Imran or Kanika? I was just going to ask, both to Ram and Ayush also, when you work with, large number of farmers and you work with large number of artisans, if you were to look from their perspective, do you think they have an enabling financing environment or products that they need? Because we've been in the previous session talking about, financial products for small businesses, and they are always small amounts, which also keep businesses at a certain level. I understand what Gauri is saying, that, you have small, they don't have a bank account, there's no bank linkage. And of course, we'll start from there. But where there is a producer company or there is a artisan cluster, which is linked to the global market, like the kind Ayush you were talking about, then there are products available for the communities, for the clusters themselves, which can help them also scale things to another level. Or are they dependent again?
So in my knowledge, there are not many products that are specifically available for artisans per se. Things like packing credit, etc., are available to the end exporter who's got the purchase orders in hand. So, there is definitely a need for that. Although I think here, the so-called middleman that I'm talking about is the person who should be facilitating it. So it is, it might not be the wisest to channel money directly, and I'm not being kind of classist in that sense, because the money is money. It need not go into the making of a product. It can go into any other aspect of life, and which is perfectly normal. Who am I to tell an artisan that no, you need to put the money into your work and not into your daughter's wedding? I am not in a position to say that, and neither is anybody else. So here, the controls of sustainability of a financial system become very, very crucial. So how it is networked, how it is channeled, I don't know whether the banks are fully equipped to give loans out, especially not to the scale as is needed. Infrastructure loans, which is like, I need to extend my shed a little bit to be able to put up 2 more looms to weave daris, is something the bank would not really entertain. So the questions and parameters that the banking system needs to be able to address at artisan levels are very different. And unfortunately, those questions are just not asked. Collaterals do not really work, especially not at the rural level, because the idea of ownerships are very different. Shared, community, family-owned house, who can give a collateral, who cannot give a collateral, all these other questions start coming up. What really works, especially at a larger scale, is when you have advances given against particular orders, is a very tried and tested method, and it has been working so far. But there is a need for capacity building investments that are given to individuals and not necessarily to groups, because an individual would be more accountable at that level unless they're organized as an SHG, of which I do not have much experience. So, probably, Sachin might be able to, or Ram Pratapji might be able to answer that part a little bit better.
Ram Pratap, would you have anything to share before we close the session on this aspect on financing?
So I just quickly want to add that there's a bit of internet connection problem, so I've switched on off my video. So the farmers face a unique problem where they need to sell their produce to be able to realize some money immediately at the time of the harvest. And if we are, so some of the more developed agrarian economies have this system where the warehouse receipt is a tradable commodity. And if we can bring in some sort of legislation to that effect, where banks are able to give part credit based on the warehouse receipt, the farmers will be able to overcome this short-term fund crisis that happens every year.
Yes, thank you, Raman. I think we have to, like what Sachin was saying, that we still have, it's a new area and we still haven't, we still need to work on the business model. We need to look at financing instruments. We need to look at communication. We need to, take advantage of the technology, especially the digital medium. I think these are areas that I think going forward, we should, as members of the community, work on. And I'm sure, colleagues at DA Access and other agencies present, even in the audience, whom we can't see, unfortunately, will come back on these issues. So I would first like to thank all the audience, whom we can't see, but thank you for your patience, thank you for listening, and thank you for your questions. And to all the panelists for taking the time out and sharing your journeys and your challenges, and also looking at the sector and suggesting the way forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Prema. Really appreciate you taking the time out to put together this panel, and I feel really honored to be amidst, veterans in this space. So really thankful for the opportunity.
Thank you. Big thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The whole day I'm walking away with so much. I feel inspired of walking away with so much knowledge and wealth of knowledge. I'd like to thank each of our panelists since morning: Chintan, Bhairavi, Anish, Ram, Ayush, Gauri, and Sachin, for tackling this subject in all its complexity. And it's, entrepreneurship is messy. It's glorious. It's messy, and I think we were talking about mindsets. We were talking about people at the center. We were talking about ecosystems, and I think these are the kind of conversations that hopefully will lead us to not only just a few entrepreneurs who have the pressure of becoming heropreneurs, but actually what Edmund Phillips called mass flourishing. And of course, thank you, Prema and Shrashtant, for sort of guiding the sessions through. I'd also really like to thank the audience again. As Prema said, that we can't see you, but thank you so much for engaging with us, asking questions, and of course being patient through the process. And we look forward to engaging much more with everyone, because if there's one thing that's emerging again and again, that we all have to work together. The silos have to break down. We have to collaborate much more. Each perspective that one brings in, whether it's design, whether it's finance or thing, they're not single instruments. They actually we will have to work in all its interconnectivity. So thank you once again, and thank you, Access, for the opportunity for us to host this track, and thank you once again. Thank you.
गांव वाले को अकेले खेती का काम दिखाता है।
फर्स्ट ऑप्शन तो वैसे नौकरी है लोगों के लिए, अगर सरकारी जॉब मिल जाए, और नहीं मिलती है तो बिजनेस ही दूसरा उसके। खेती में उतनी आमदनी नहीं है।
हम ये सोच रहे हैं कि खेती का काम तो हर कोई करता है, लेकिन ऐसा एक काम करें कि जिसमें नाम रोशन हो और अच्छा काम हो।
मैं कैना गाँव की हूँ और कैना में चूड़ियों की दुकान चलाती हूँ औरतों के लिए। जी, गांव की औरतें बाहर से माल लाती थी, मतलब सौदा, चूड़ी वगैरह, कंगन।